Jane Eyre, an autobiography, by Charlotte Brontë. Chapter 6. The next day commenced as before, getting up and dressing by rushlight. But this morning we were obliged to dispense with the ceremony of washing. The water in the pitchers was frozen. A change had taken place in the weather the preceding evening, and a keen northeast wind, whistling through the crevices of our bedroom windows all night long, had made us shiver in our beds and turned the contents of the ewers to ice. Before the long hour and a half of prayers and Bible reading was over, I felt ready to perish with cold. Breakfast time came at last, and this morning the porridge was not burnt. The quality was eatable, the quantity small. How small my portion seemed! I wished it had been doubled. In the course of the day I was enrolled a member of the 4th class, and regular tasks and occupations were assigned me. Hitherto, I had only been a spectator of the proceedings at Lowood. I was now to become an actor therein. At first, being little accustomed to learn by heart, the lessons appeared to me both long and difficult. The frequent change from task to task, too, bewildered me, and I was glad when, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Miss Smith put into my hands a border of muslin 2 yards long, together with needle, thimble, etc., and sent me to sit in a quiet corner of the schoolroom, with directions to hem the same. At that hour most of the others were sewing likewise. But one class still stood round, Miss Scatcherd's chair reading, and as all was quiet, the subject of their lessons could be heard, together with the manner in which each girl acquitted herself, and the animadversions or commendations of Miss Scatcherd on the performance. It was English history. Among the readers I observed my acquaintance of the veranda at the commencement of the lesson. Her place had been at the top of the class, but for some error of pronunciation, or some inattention to stops, she was suddenly sent to the very bottom. Even in that obscure position, Miss Scatcherd continued to make her an object of constant notice. She was continually addressing to her such phrases as the following: Burns. Such it seems was her name. The girls here were all called by their surnames, as boys are elsewhere. Burns, you are standing on the side of your shoe. Turn your toes out immediately. You poke your chin most unpleasantly. Draw it in. Burns, I insist on your holding your head up. I will not have you before me in that attitude. A chapter having been read through twice, the books were closed, and the girls examined. The lesson had comprised part of the reign of Charles I, and there were sundry questions about tonnage and poundage and ship money, which most of them appeared unable to answer. Still, every little difficulty was solved instantly. When it reached Burns, her memory seemed to have retained the substance of the whole lesson, and she was ready with answers on every point. I kept expecting that Miss Scatcherd would praise her attention. But, instead of that, she suddenly cried out, You dirty, disagreeable girl. You have never cleaned your nails this morning. Burns made no answer. I wondered at her silence. Why, thought I, does she not explain that she could neither clean her nails nor wash her face, as the water was frozen? My attention was now called off by Miss Smith desiring me to hold a skein of thread. While she was winding it, she talked to me from time to time, asking whether I had ever been at school before, whether I could mark, stitch, knit, etc., till she dismissed me. I could not pursue my observations on Miss Scatcherd's movements. When I returned to my seat, that lady was just delivering an order of which I did not catch the import. But Burns immediately left the class, and going into the small inner room where the books were kept, returned in half a minute, carrying in her hand a bundle of twigs tied together at one end. This ominous tool she presented to Miss Scatcherd with a respectful courtesy. Then she quietly, and without being told, unloosed her pinafore, and the teacher instantly and sharply inflicted on her neck a dozen strokes with the bunch of twigs. Not a tear rose to Burns' eye, and, while I paused for my sewing, because my fingers quivered at this spectacle, with a sentiment of unavailing and impotent anger, not a feature of her pensive face altered its ordinary expression. Hardened girl, exclaimed Miss Scatcherd. Nothing can correct you of your slatternly habits. Carry the rod away. Burns obeyed. I looked at her narrowly as she emerged from the book closet. She was just putting back her handkerchief into her pocket, and the trace of a tear glistened on her thin cheek. The play hour in the evening, I thought the pleasantest fraction of the day at Lowood. The bit of bread. The draught of coffee swallowed at 5 o'clock had revived vitality. If it had not satisfied hunger, the long restraint of the day was slackened. The schoolroom felt warmer than in the morning. its fires being allowed to burn a little more brightly to supply, in some measure, the place of candles, not yet introduced, the ruddy gloaming, the licensed uproar. The confusion of many voices gave one a welcome sense of liberty. On the evening of the day on which I had seen Miss Scatcherd flog her pupil, Burns, I wandered as usual among the forms and tables and laughing groups without a companion, yet not feeling lonely. When I passed the windows, I now and then lifted a blind and looked out. It snowed fast. A drift was already forming against the lower panes. Putting my ear close to the window, I could distinguish from the gleeful tumult within the disconsolate moan of the wind outside. Probably, if I had lately left a good home and kind parents, this would have been the hour when I should most keenly have regretted the separation. That wind would then have saddened my heart. This obscure chaos would have disturbed my peace. As it was, I derived from both a strange excitement and reckless and feverish. I wished the wind to howl more wildly, the gloom to deepen to darkness, and the confusion to rise to clamor, jumping over forms and creeping under tables. I made my way to one of the fireplaces. There, kneeling by the high-wire fender, I found Burns, absorbed, silent, abstracted from all round her by the companionship of a book, which she read by the dim glare of the embers. "Is it still, Rasselas?" I asked, coming behind her. "Yes," she said, "and I have just finished it." And in 5 minutes more she shut it up. I was glad of this. Now, thought I can perhaps get her to talk. I sat down by her on the floor. "What is your name besides Burns?" "Helen." "Do you come a long way from here?" "I come from a place farther north, quite on the borders of Scotland." "Will you ever go back?" "I hope so, but nobody can be sure of the future." "You must wish to leave Lowood." "No, why should I? I was sent to Lowood to get an education, and it would be of no use going away until I have attained that object." "But that teacher, Miss Scatcherd, is so cruel to you." "Cruel? Not at all. She is severe. She dislikes my faults. And if I were in your place, I should dislike her. I should resist her. If she struck me with that rod, I should get it from her hand. I should break it under her nose. Probably you would do nothing of the sort, but if you did, Mr. Brocklehurst would expel you from the school. That would be a great grief to your relations. It is far better to endure patiently a smart which nobody feels but yourself, than to commit a hasty action whose evil consequences will extend to all connected with you. And besides, the Bible bids us return good for evil. But then it seems disgraceful to be flogged, and to be sent to stand in the middle of a room full of people. And you are such a great girl. I am far younger than you, and I could not bear it. Yet it would be your duty to bear it, if you could not avoid it. It is weak and silly to say, you two I cannot bear, what it is, your fate to be required to bear. I heard her with wonder. I could not comprehend this doctrine of endurance, and still less could I understand or sympathize with the forbearance she expressed for her chastiser. Still I felt that Helen Burns considered things by a light invisible to my eyes. I suspected she might be right and I wrong, but I would not ponder the matter deeply. Like Felix, I put it off to a more convenient season. "You say you have faults. Helen, what are they?" "To me you seem very good." "Then learn from me. Not to judge by appearances I am, as Miss Scatcherd said, slatternly. I seldom put, and never keep things in order. I am careless. I forget rules. I read when I should learn my lessons. I have no method. And sometimes I say, like you, I cannot Torquay bear to be subjected to systematic arrangements." This is all very provoking to Miss Scatcherd, who is naturally neat, punctual, and particular. "And cross and cruel," I added. But Helen Burns would not admit my addition. She kept silence. "Is Miss Temple as severe to you as Miss Scatcherd?" At the utterance of Miss Temple's name, a soft smile flitted over her grave face. "Miss Temple is full of goodness. It pains her to be severe to anyone. Even the worst in the school, she sees my errors, and tells me of them gently, and, if I do anything worthy of praise, she gives me my meed liberally. One strong proof of my wretchedly defective nature is, that even her expostulations, so mild, so rational, have not influence to cure me of my faults, and even her praise, though I value it most highly, cannot stimulate me to continued care and foresight." That is curious, said I. It is so easy to be careful. For you, I have no doubt it is. I observed you in your class this morning, and saw you were closely attentive. Your thoughts never seemed to wander, while Miss Miller explained the lesson and questioned you. Now, mine continually rove away. When I should be listening to Miss Scatcherd and collecting all she says with assiduity, often I lose the very sound of her voice. I fall into a sort of dream. Sometimes I think I am in Northumberland, and that the noises I hear round me are the bubbling of a little brook which runs through Deepden near our house. Then, when it comes to my turn to reply, I have to be awakened, and having heard nothing of what was read for listening to the visionary brook, I have no answer ready. Yet how well you replied this afternoon. It was mere chance the subject on which we had been reading had interested me. This afternoon, instead of dreaming of Deepden, I was wondering how a man who wished to do right could act so unjustly and unwisely as Charles I sometimes did. And I thought what a pity it was that, with his integrity and conscientiousness, he could see no farther than the prerogatives of the crown, if he had but been able to look to a distance and see how what they call the spirit of the age was tending. Still, I like Charles. I respect him. I pity him. Poor murdered king. Yes. His enemies were the worst. They shed blood. They had no right to shed. How dared they kill him? Helen was talking to herself now. She had forgotten I could not very well understand her, that I was ignorant, or nearly so, of the subject she discussed. I recalled her to my level. And when Miss Temple teaches you, do your thoughts wander then? No, certainly, not often, because Miss Temple has generally something to say which is newer than my own reflections. Her language is singularly agreeable to me, and the information she communicates is often just what I wished to gain. Well, then with Miss Temple you are good. Yes, in a passive way. I make no effort. I follow as inclination guides me. There is no merit in such goodness. A great deal. You are good to those who are good to you. It is all I ever desire to be. If people were always kind and obedient to those who are cruel and unjust, the wicked people would have it all their own way. They would never feel afraid, and so they would never alter, but would grow worse and worse. When we are struck at without a reason, we should strike back again very hard. I am sure we should so hard as to teach the person who struck us never to do it again. You will change your mind, I hope, when you grow older. As yet you are but a little untaught girl. But I feel this, Helen. I must dislike those who, whatever I do to please them, persist in disliking me. I must resist those who punish me unjustly. It is as natural as that I should love those who show me affection, or submit to punishment when I feel it is deserved. Heathens and savage tribes hold that doctrine, but Christians and civilized nations disown it. How? I don't understand. It is not violence that best overcomes hate, nor vengeance that most certainly heals injury. What then? Read the New Testament, and observe what Christ says, and how he acts. Make his word your rule, and his conduct your example. What does he say? Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you and despitefully use you. Then I should love Mrs. Reed, which I cannot do. I should bless her son John, which is impossible. In her turn, Helen Burns asked me to explain, and I proceeded forthwith to pour out, in my own way, the tale of my sufferings and resentments, bitter and truculent when excited. I spoke as I felt, without reserve or softening. Helen heard me patiently to the end. I expected she would then make a remark, but she said nothing. Well, I asked impatiently, is not Mrs. Reed a hard-hearted, bad woman? She has been unkind to you, no doubt, because you see she dislikes your cast of character, as Miss Scatcherd does mine. But how minutely you remember all she has done and said to you. What a singularly deep impression her injustice seems to have made on your heart. No elusage, so brands its record on my feelings. Would you not be happier if you tried to forget her severity, together with the passionate emotions it excited? Life appears to me too short to be spent in nursing animosity or registering wrongs. We are, and must be, one and all, burdened with faults in this world. But the time will soon come when, I trust, we shall put them off in putting off our corruptible bodies, when debasement and sin will fall from us with this cumbrous frame of flesh, and only the spark of the Spirit will remain, the impalpable principle of light and thought, pure as when it left the Creator to inspire the creature. Whence it came, it will return, perhaps again to be communicated to some being higher than man, perhaps to pass through gradations of glory, from the pale human soul to brighten to the seraph. Surely it will never, on the contrary, be suffered to degenerate from man to fiend. No, I cannot believe that. I hold another creed, which no one ever taught me, and which I seldom mention, but in which I delight, and to which I cling, for it extends hope to all. It makes eternity a rest, a mighty home, not a terror and an abyss. Besides, with this creed, I can so clearly distinguish between the criminal and his crime. I can so sincerely forgive the first while I abhor the last. With this creed, revenge never worries my heart. Degradation never too deeply disgusts me. Injustice never crushes me too low. I live in calm, looking to the end. Helen's head, always drooping, sank a little lower as she finished this sentence. I saw by her look she wished no longer to talk to me, but rather to converse with her own thoughts. She was not allowed much time for meditation. A monitor, a great rough girl, presently came up, exclaiming in a strong Cumberland accent, "Helen Burns, if you don't go and put your drawer in order, and fold up your work this minute, I'll tell Miss Scatcherd to come and look at it." Helen sighed as her reverie fled, and getting up, obeyed the monitor without reply, as without delay. Chapter 7. My first quarter at Lowood seemed an age, and not the golden age either. It comprised an irksome struggle with difficulties in habituating myself to new rules and unwanted tasks. The fear of failure in these points harassed me worse than the physical hardships of my lot, though these were no trifles. During January and part of March, the deep snows, and after their melting, the almost impassable roads, prevented our stirring beyond the garden walls, except to go to church. But within these limits we had to pass an hour every day in the open air. Our clothing was insufficient to protect us from the severe cold. We had no boots. The snow got into our shoes and melted there. Our ungloved hands became numbed and covered with chilblains, as were our feet. I remember well the distracting irritation I endured from this cause. Every evening, when my feet inflamed, and the torture of thrusting the swelled, raw, and stiff toes into my shoes in the morning. Then the scanty supply of food was distressing, with the keen appetites of growing children. We had scarcely sufficient to keep alive a delicate invalid. From this deficiency of nourishment resulted an abuse, which pressed hardly on the younger pupils. Whenever the famished great girls had an opportunity, they would coax or menace the little ones out of their portion. Many a time I have shared between two claimants the precious morsel of brown bread distributed at tea time, and after relinquishing to a third half the contents of my mug of coffee, I have swallowed the remainder with an accompaniment of secret tears, forced from me by the exigency of hunger. Sundays were dreary days in that wintry season. We had to walk 2 miles to Brocklebridge Church, where our patron officiated. We set out cold. We arrived at church colder. During the morning service, we became almost paralyzed. It was too far to return to dinner, and an allowance of cold meat and bread, in the same penurious proportion observed in our ordinary meals, was served round between the services. At the close of the afternoon service, we returned by an exposed and hilly road, where the bitter winter wind, blowing over a range of snowy summits to the north, almost flayed the skin from our faces. I can remember Miss Temple walking lightly and rapidly along our drooping line. Her plaid cloak, which the frosty wind fluttered, gathered close about her, and encouraging us, by precept and example, to keep up our spirits and march forward, as she said. Like stalwart soldiers, the other teachers, poor things, were generally themselves too much dejected to attempt the task of cheering others. How we longed for the light and heat of a blazing fire when we got back. But, to the little ones at least, this was denied. Each hearth in the schoolroom was immediately surrounded by a double row of great girls, and behind them the younger children crouched in groups. Wrapping their starved arms in their pinafores, a little solace came at tea time, in the shape of a double ration of bread, a whole, instead of a half slice, with the delicious addition of a thin scrape of butter. It was the hebdomadal treat to which we all looked forward from Sabbath to Sabbath. I generally contrived to reserve a moiety of this bounteous repast for myself, but the remainder I was invariably obliged to part with. The Sunday evening was spent in repeating, by heart, the Church Catechism and the 5th, 6th, and 7th chapters of St. Matthew, and in listening to a long sermon, read by Miss Miller, whose irrepressible yawns attested her weariness. A frequent interlude of these performances was the enactment of the part of Eutychus by some half-dozen of little girls, who, overpowered with sleep, would fall down, if not out of the 3rd loft, yet off the 4th form, and be taken up half dead. The remedy was to thrust them forward into the center of the schoolroom, and oblige them to stand there till the sermon was finished. Sometimes their feet failed them, and they sank together in a heap. They were then propped up with the monitor's high stools. I have not yet alluded to the visits of Mr. Brocklehurst, and indeed that gentleman was from home during the greater part of the 1st month after my arrival, perhaps prolonging his stay with his friend, the Archdeacon. His absence was a relief to me. I need not say that I had my own reasons for dreading his coming, but come he did at last. One afternoon, I had then been 3 weeks at Lowood, as I was sitting with a slate in my hand, puzzling over a sum in long division, my eyes, raised in abstraction to the window, caught sight of a figure just passing. I recognized almost instinctively that gaunt outline, and when, 2 minutes after, all the school, teachers included, rose en masse, it was not necessary for me to look up, in order to ascertain whose entrance they thus greeted. A long stride measured the schoolroom, and presently beside Miss Temple, who herself had risen, stood the same black column, which had frowned on me so ominously from the hearthrug of Gateshead. I now glanced sideways at this piece of architecture. Yes, I was right. It was Mr. Brocklehurst, buttoned up in a surtout, and looking longer, narrower, and more rigid than ever. I had my own reasons for being dismayed at this apparition. Too well I remembered the perfidious hints given by Mrs. Reed about my disposition, etc., the promise pledged by Mr. Brocklehurst to apprise Miss Temple and the teachers of my vicious nature. All along, I had been dreading the fulfillment of this promise. I had been looking out daily for the coming man, whose information respecting my past life and conversation was to brand me as a bad child forever. Now there he was. He stood at Miss Temple's side. He was speaking low in her ear. I did not doubt he was making disclosures of my villainy, and I watched her eye with painful anxiety, expecting every moment to see its dark orb turn on me a glance of repugnance and contempt. I listened too, and as I happened to be seated quite at the top of the room, I caught most of what he said. Its import relieved me from immediate apprehension. I suppose, Miss Temple, the thread I bought at Loughton will do. It struck me that it would be just of the quality for the calico chemises, and I sorted the needles to match. You may tell Miss Smith that I forgot to make a memorandum of the darning needles, but she shall have some papers sent in next week, and she is not, on any account, to give out more than one at a time to each pupil. If they have more, they are apt to be careless and lose them. And, oh, Mum, I wish the woolen stockings were better looked to. When I was here last, I went into the kitchen garden and examined the clothes drying on the line. There was a quantity of black hose in a very bad state of repair. From the size of the holes in them, I was sure they had not been well mended from time to time. He paused. Your directions shall be attended to, sir, said Miss Temple. And, Ma'am, he continued, the laundress tells me some of the girls have 2 clean tuckers in the week. It is too much. The rules limit them to 1. I think I can explain that circumstance, sir. Agnes and Catherine Johnstone were invited to take tea with some friends at Loughton last Thursday, and I gave them leave to put on clean tuckers for the occasion. Mr. Brocklehurst nodded. Well, for once it may pass, but please not to let the circumstance occur too often. And there is another thing which surprised me. I find, in settling accounts with the housekeeper, that a lunch consisting of bread and cheese has twice been served out to the girls during the past fortnight. How is this? I looked over the regulations, and I find no such meal as lunch mentioned. Who introduced this innovation, and by what authority? I must be responsible for the circumstance, sir, replied Miss Temple. The breakfast was so ill-prepared that the pupils could not possibly eat it, and I dared not allow them to remain fasting till dinner-time. Madam, allow me an instant. You are aware that my plan in bringing up these girls is not to accustom them to habits of luxury and indulgence, but to render them hardy, patient, self-denying. Should any little accidental disappointment of the appetite occur, such as the spoiling of a meal, the under or the overdressing of a dish, the incident ought not to be neutralized by replacing with something more delicate the comfort lost, thus pampering the body and obviating the aim of this institution. It ought to be improved to the spiritual edification of the pupils, by encouraging them to evince fortitude under the temporary privation. A brief address on those occasions would not be mistimed, wherein a judicious instructor would take the opportunity of referring to the sufferings of the primitive Christians, to the torments of martyrs, to the exhortations of our blessed Lord himself, calling upon his disciples to take up their cross and follow him, to his warnings that man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God, to his divine consolations, if ye suffer hunger or thirst, for my sake, happy are ye. O madam, when you put bread and cheese, instead of burnt porridge, into these children's mouths, you may indeed feed their vile bodies, but you little think how you starve their immortal souls. Mr. Brocklehurst again paused, perhaps overcome by his feelings. Miss Temple had looked down when he first began to speak to her, but she now gazed straight before her, and her face, naturally pale as marble, appeared to be assuming also the coldness and fixity of that material, especially her mouth, closed as if it would have required a sculptor's chisel to open it, and her brow settled gradually into petrified severity. Meantime, Mr. Brocklehurst, standing on the hearth with his hands behind his back, majestically surveyed the whole school. Suddenly, his eye gave a blink, as if it had met something that either dazzled or shocked its pupil. Turning, he said in more rapid accents than he had hitherto used, Miss Temple, Miss Temple. What is that girl with curled hair? Red hair, ma'am, curled all over." And extending his cane, he pointed to the awful object, his hand shaking as he did so. "It is Julia Severn," replied Miss Temple, very quietly. "Julia Severn, mamam. And why has she, or any other, curled hair? Why, in defiance of every precept and principle of this house, does she conform to the world so openly, here, in an evangelical, charitable establishment, as to wear her hair one mass of curls?" "Julia's hair curls, naturally," returned Miss Temple, still more quietly. "Naturally, yes. But we are not to conform to nature. I wish these girls to be the children of grace. And why that abundance? I have again and again intimated that I desire the hair to be arranged closely, modestly. Miss Temple, that girl's hair must be cut off entirely. I will send a barber tomorrow, and I see others who have far too much of the excrescence. That tall girl, tell her to turn round. Tell all the first form to rise up and direct their faces to the wall." Miss Temple passed her handkerchief over her lips, as if to smooth away the involuntary smile that curled them. She gave the order, however, and when the first class could take in what was required of them, they obeyed. Leaning a little back on my bench, I could see the looks and grimaces with which they commented on this maneuver. It was a pity Mr. Brocklehurst could not see them too. He would perhaps have felt that, whatever he might do with the outside of the cup and platter, the inside was further beyond his interference than he imagined. He scrutinized the reverse of these living metals some 5 minutes, then pronounced sentence. These words fell like the knell of doom. All those top-knots must be cut off. Miss Temple seemed to remonstrate. "Madam," he pursued, "I have a master to serve whose kingdom is not of this world. My mission is to mortify in these girls the lusts of the flesh, to teach them to clothe themselves with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with braided hair and costly apparel. And each of the young persons before us has a string of hair twisted in plaits which vanity itself might have woven. These, I repeat, must be cut off. Think of the time wasted of—" Mr. Brocklehurst was here interrupted. 3 other visitors, ladies, now entered the room. They ought to have come a little sooner to have heard his lecture on dress, for they were splendidly attired in velvet, silk, and furs. The 2 younger of the trio, fine girls of 16 and 17, had gray beaver hats, then in fashion, shaded with ostrich plumes, and from under the brim of this graceful headdress fell a profusion of light tresses, elaborately curled. The elder lady was enveloped in a costly velvet shawl, trimmed with ermine, and she wore a false front of French curls. These ladies were deferentially received by Miss Temple as Mrs. and the Misses Brocklehurst, and conducted to seats of honor at the top of the room. It seems they had come in the carriage with their reverend relative, and had been conducting a rummaging scrutiny of the room upstairs, while he transacted business with the housekeeper, questioned the laundress, and lectured the superintendent. They now proceeded to address divers remarks and reproofs to Miss Smith, who was charged with the care of the linen and the inspection of the dormitories. But I had no time to listen to what they said. Other matters called off and enchanted my attention. Hitherto, while gathering up the discourse of Mr. Brocklehurst and Miss Temple, I had not, at the same time, neglected precautions to secure my personal safety, which I thought would be effected, if I could only elude observation. To this end, I had sat well back on the form, and while seeming to be busy with my sum, had held my slate in such a manner as to conceal my face. I might have escaped notice had not my treacherous slate somehow happened to slip from my hand, and falling with an obtrusive crash, directly drawn every eye upon me. I knew it was all over now. And, as I stooped to pick up the 2 fragments of slate, I rallied my forces for the worst. It came. "A careless girl," said Mr. Brocklehurst, and immediately after, "It is the new pupil I perceive." And before I could draw breath, "I must not forget, I have a word to say respecting her." Then aloud, how loud it seemed to me, "Let the child who broke her slate come forward." Of my own accord, I could not have stirred. I was paralyzed. But the 2 great girls who sat on each side of me set me on my legs and pushed me towards the dread judge, and then Miss Temple gently assisted me to his very feet. And I caught her whispered counsel. "Don't be afraid, Jane. I saw it was an accident. You shall not be punished." The kind whisper went to my heart like a dagger. Another minute, and she will despise me for a hypocrite, thought I, and an impulse of fury against Reed. Brocklehurst and company bounded in my pulses at the conviction. I was no Helen Burns. "Fetch that stool," said Mr. Brocklehurst. Pointing to a very high one from which a monitor had just risen, it was brought. "Place the child upon it." And I was placed there. By whom, I don't know. I was in no condition to note particulars. I was only aware that they had hoisted me up to the height of Mr. Brocklehurst's nose, that he was within a yard of me, and that a spread of shot, orange and purple silk pelisses, and a cloud of silvery plumage, extended and waved below me. Mr. Brocklehurst hemmed. "Ladies," said he, turning to his family, "Miss Temple, teachers, and children, you all see this girl." Of course they did, for I felt their eyes directed like burning glasses against my scorched skin. "You see she is yet young. You observe she possesses the ordinary form of childhood. God has graciously given her the shape that he has given to all of us. No signal deformity points her out as a marked character. Who would think that the evil one had already found a servant and agent in her? Yet such, I grieve to say, is the case." A pause, in which I began to steady the palsy of my nerves, and to feel that the Rubicon was passed, and that the trial, no longer to be shirked, must be firmly sustained. "My dear children," pursued the black marble clergyman, with pathos, "this is a sad, a melancholy occasion, for it becomes my duty to warn you that this girl, who might be one of God's own lambs, is a little castaway, not a member of the true flock, but evidently an interloper and an alien. You must be on your guard against her. You must shun her example, if necessary, avoid her company, exclude her from your sports, and shut her out from your converse. Teachers, you must watch her, keep your eyes on her movements, weigh well her words, scrutinize her actions, punish her body to save her soul, if indeed such salvation be possible, for my tongue falters while I tell it. This girl, the native of a Christian land, worse than many a little heathen who says its prayers to Brahma and kneels before Juggernaut. This girl is a liar." Now came a pause of 10 minutes, during which I, by this time, in perfect possession of my wits, observed all the female Brocklehursts produce their pocket-handkerchiefs and apply them to their optics, while the elderly lady swayed herself to and fro, and the 2 younger ones whispered. "How shocking," Mr. Brocklehurst resumed. "This I learned from her benefactress, from the pious and charitable lady who adopted her in her orphan state, reared her as her own daughter, and whose kindness, whose generosity, the unhappy girl repaid by an ingratitude so bad, so dreadful, that at last her excellent patroness was obliged to separate her from her own young ones, fearful lest her vicious example should contaminate their purity. She has sent her here to be healed, even as the Jews of old sent their diseased to the troubled pool of Bethesda. And, teachers, superintendent, I beg of you not to allow the waters to stagnate round her. With this sublime conclusion, Mr. Brocklehurst adjusted the top button of his surtout, muttered something to his family, who rose bowed to Miss Temple, and then all the great people sailed in state from the room. Turning at the door, my judge said, "Let her stand half an hour longer on that stool, and let no one speak to her during the remainder of the day." There was I then, mounted aloft. I, who had said I could not bear the shame of standing on my natural feet in the middle of the room, was now exposed to general view on a pedestal of infamy. What my sensations were, no language can describe, but just as they all rose, stifling my breath and constricting my throat, a girl came up and passed me. In passing, she lifted her eyes. What a strange light inspired them! What an extraordinary sensation that ray sent through me! How the new feeling bore me up! It was as if a martyr, a hero, had passed a slave or victim, and imparted strength in the transit. I mastered the rising hysteria, lifted up my head, and took a firm stand on the stool. Helen Burns asked some slight question about her work of Miss Smith, was chidden for the triviality of the inquiry, returned to her place, and smiled at me as she again went by. What a smile! I remember it now, and I know that it was the effluence of fine intellect, of true courage. It lit up her marked lineaments, her thin face, her sunken gray eye, like a reflection from the aspect of an angel. Yet at that moment, Helen Burns wore on her arm the untidy badge. Scarcely an hour ago, I had heard her condemned by Miss Scatcherd to a dinner of bread and water on the morrow, because she had blotted an exercise in copying it out. Such is the imperfect nature of man. Such spots are there on the disk of the clearest planet. And eyes like Miss Scatcherd's can only see those minute defects, and are blind to the full brightness of the orb. Chapter 8. Ere the half-hour ended, 5 o'clock struck. School was dismissed, and all were gone into the refectory to tea. I now ventured to descend. It was deep dusk. I retired into a corner and sat down on the floor. The spell by which I had been so far supported began to dissolve. Reaction took place, and soon, so overwhelming was the grief that seized me, I sank prostrate with my face to the ground. Now I wept. Helen Burns was not here. Nothing sustained me. Left to myself, I abandoned myself, and my tears watered the boards. I had meant to be so good, and to do so much at Lowood, to make so many friends, to earn respect and win affection. Already, I had made visible progress. That very morning I had reached the head of my class. Miss Miller had praised me warmly. Miss Temple had smiled approbation. She had promised to teach me drawing, and to let me learn French, if I continued to make similar improvement 2 months longer. And then I was well received by my fellow pupils, treated as an equal by those of my own age, and not molested by any. Now, here I lay again, crushed and trodden on. And could I ever rise more? Never, I thought, and ardently I wished to die. While sobbing out this wish in broken accents, someone approached. I started up. Again Helen Burns was near me. The fading fires just showed her coming up the long, vacant room. She brought my coffee and bread. "Come, eat something," she said. But I put both away from me, feeling as if a drop or a crumb would have choked me in my present condition. Helen regarded me, probably with surprise. I could not now abate my agitation, though I tried hard. I continued to weep aloud. She sat down on the ground near me, embraced her knees with her arms, and rested her head upon them. In that attitude, she remained silent as an Indian. I was the first who spoke. "Helen, why do you stay with a girl whom everybody believes to be a liar?" "Everybody, Jane." "Why? There are only 80 people who have heard you called so, and the world contains hundreds of millions. But what have I to do with millions? The 80 I know despise me. Jane, you are mistaken. Probably not one in the school either despises or dislikes you. Many, I am sure, pity you much. How can they pity me after what Mr. Brocklehurst has said? Mr. Brocklehurst is not a god, nor is he even a great and admired man. He is little liked here. He never took steps to make himself liked. Had he treated you as an especial favorite, you would have found enemies, declared or covert. All around you, as it is, the greater number would offer you sympathy, if they dared. Teachers and pupils may look coldly on you for a day or two, but friendly feelings are concealed in their hearts. And if you persevere in doing well, these feelings will ere long appear so much the more evidently for their temporary suppression. Besides, Jane, she paused. Well, Helen, said I, putting my hand into hers. She chafed my fingers gently to warm them, and went on. If all the world hated you, and believed you wicked, while your own conscience approved you, and absolved you from guilt, you would not be without friends. No, I know I should think well of myself, but that is not enough. If others don't love me, I would rather die than live. I cannot bear to be solitary and hated. Helen, look here. To gain some real affection from you, or Miss Temple, or any other whom I truly love, I would willingly submit to have the bone of my arm broken, or to let a bull toss me, or to stand behind a kicking horse, and let it dash its hoof at my chest. Hush, Jane. You think too much of the love of human beings. You are too impulsive, too vehement. The sovereign hand that created your frame and put life into it has provided you with other resources than your feeble self, or than creatures feeble as you. Besides this earth, and besides the race of men, there is an invisible world and a kingdom of spirits. That world is round us, for it is everywhere, and those spirits watch us. For they are commissioned to guard us, and if we were dying in pain and shame, if scorn smote us on all sides, and hatred crushed us, angels see our tortures, recognize our innocence, if innocent we be. As I know you are of this charge, which Mr. Brocklehurst has weakly and pompously repeated at second hand from Mrs. Reed, for I read a sincere nature in your ardent eyes and on your clear front, and God waits only the separation of spirit from flesh to crown us with a full reward. Why, then, should we ever sink overwhelmed with distress when life is so soon over, and death is so certain an entrance to happiness, to glory? I was silent. Helen had calmed me. But in the tranquility she imparted, there was an alloy of inexpressible sadness. I felt the impression of woe as she spoke, but I could not tell whence it came, and when, having done speaking, she breathed a little fast, and coughed a short cough, I momentarily forgot my own sorrows to yield to a vague concern for her. Resting my head on Helen's shoulder, I put my arms round her waist. She drew me to her, and we reposed in silence. We had not sat long thus, when another person came in. Some heavy clouds, swept from the sky by a rising wind, had left the moon bare, and her light, streaming in through a window near, shone full both on us and on the approaching figure, which we at once recognized as Miss Temple. I came on purpose to find you, Jane Eyre, said she. I want you in my room, and as Helen Burns is with you, she may come too. We went, following the superintendent's guidance. We had to thread some intricate passages, and mount a staircase before we reached her apartment. It contained a good fire, and looked cheerful. Miss Temple told Helen Burns to be seated in a low armchair on one side of the hearth, and herself taking another, she called me to her side. Is it all over? She asked, looking down at my face. Have you cried your grief away? I am afraid I never shall do that. Why? Because I have been wrongly accused, and you, Mom, and everybody else, will now think me wicked. We shall think you what you prove yourself to be, my child. Continue to act as a good girl, and you will satisfy us. Shall I, Miss Temple? You will, said she, passing her arm round me. And now tell me, who is the lady whom Mr. Brocklehurst called your benefactress? Mrs. Reed, my uncle's wife. My uncle is dead, and he left me to her care. Did she not, then, adopt you of her own accord? No, ma'am, she was sorry to have to do it. But my uncle, as I have often heard the servants say, got her to promise before he died that she would always keep me. Well now, Jane, you know, or at least I will tell you, that when a criminal is accused, he is always allowed to speak in his own defense. You have been charged with falsehood, Defend yourself to me as well as you can. Say whatever your memory suggests is true, but add nothing and exaggerate nothing. I resolved, in the depth of my heart, that I would be most moderate, most correct, and having reflected a few minutes in order to arrange coherently what I had to say, I told her all the story of my sad childhood. Exhausted by emotion, my language was more subdued than it generally was when it developed that sad theme, and mindful of Helen's warnings against the indulgence of resentment, I infused into the narrative far less of gall and wormwood than ordinary. Thus restrained and simplified, it sounded more credible. I felt as I went on that Miss Temple fully believed me. In the course of the tale I had mentioned Mr. Lloyd as having come to see me after the fit, for I never forgot the, to me, frightful episode of the Red Room, in detailing which my excitement was sure, in some degree, to break bounds, for nothing could soften in my recollection the spasm of agony which clutched my heart when Mrs. Reed spurned my wild supplication for pardon and locked me a second time in the dark and haunted chamber. I had finished. Miss Temple regarded me a few minutes in silence. She then said, "I know something of Mr. Lloyd. I shall write to him. If his reply agrees with your statement, you shall be publicly cleared from every imputation. To me, Jane, you are clear now." She kissed me, and still keeping me at her side, where I was well contented to stand, for I derived a child's pleasure from the contemplation of her face, her dress, her one or two ornaments, her white forehead, her clustered and shining curls, and beaming dark eyes. She proceeded to address Helen Burns. "How are you tonight? Helen, have you coughed much today?" "Not quite so much, I think, Ma'am. And the pain in your chest?" "It is a little better." Miss Temple got up, took her hand and examined her pulse. Then she returned to her own seat. As she resumed it, I heard her sigh low. She was pensive a few minutes. Then, rousing herself, she said cheerfully, "But you too are my visitors tonight. I must treat you as such." She rang her bell. "Barbara," she said to the servant who answered it, "I have not yet had tea. Bring the tray and place cups for these two young ladies." And a tray was soon brought. How pretty, to my eyes, did the china cups and bright teapot look, placed on the little round table near the fire. How fragrant was the steam of the beverage, and the scent of the toast, of which, however, I, to my dismay, for I was beginning to be hungry, discerned only a very small portion. Miss Temple discerned it too. "Barbara," said she, "can you not bring a little more bread and butter? There is not enough for 3. Barbara went out. She returned soon. "Madam, Mrs. Harden says she has sent up the usual quantity." Mrs. Harden, be it observed, was the housekeeper, a woman after Mr. Brocklehurst's own heart, made up of equal parts of whalebone and iron. "Oh, very well," returned Miss Temple. "We must make it do, Barbara, I suppose." And as the girl withdrew, she added, smiling, "Fortunately, I have it in my power to supply deficiencies for this once." Having invited Helen and me to approach the table, and placed before each of us a cup of tea with one delicious but thin morsel of toast, she got up, unlocked a drawer, and taking from it a parcel wrapped in paper, disclosed presently to our eyes a good-sized seed cake. "I meant to give each of you some of this to take with you," said she, "but as there is so little toast, you must have it now." And she proceeded to cut slices with a generous hand. We feasted that evening, as on nectar and ambrosia, and not the least delight of the entertainment was the smile of gratification with which our hostess regarded us. As we satisfied our famished appetites on the delicate fare she liberally supplied, tea over and the tray removed, she again summoned us to the fire. We sat one on each side of her, and now a conversation followed between her and Helen, which it was indeed a privilege to be admitted to hear. Miss Temple had always something of serenity in her air, of state in her mien, of refined propriety in her language, which precluded deviation into the ardent, the excited, the eager, something which chastened the pleasure of those who looked on her and listened to her by a controlling sense of awe. And such was my feeling now. But as to Helen Burns, I was struck with wonder. The refreshing meal, the brilliant fire, the presence and kindness of her beloved instructress, Or, perhaps more than all these, something in her own unique mind had roused her powers within her. They woke. They kindled. First, they glowed in the bright tint of her cheek, which till this hour I had never seen, but pale and bloodless. Then they shone in the liquid luster of her eyes, which had suddenly acquired a beauty more singular than that of Miss Temple's. A beauty neither of fine color nor long eyelash, nor penciled brow, but of meaning, of movement, of radiance. Then her soul sat on her lips, and language flowed from what source I cannot tell. Has a girl of 14 a heart large enough, vigorous enough, to hold the swelling spring of pure, full, fervid eloquence? Such was the characteristic of Helen's discourse on that, to me, memorable evening. Her spirit seemed hastening to live within a very brief span, as much as many live during a protracted existence. They conversed of things I had never heard of nations and times past, of countries far away, of secrets of nature discovered, or guessed at. They spoke of books, how many they had read, what stores of knowledge they possessed. Then they seemed so familiar with French names and French authors. But my amazement reached its climax when Miss Temple asked Helen if she sometimes snatched a moment to recall the Latin her father had taught her, and taking a book from a shelf, bade her read, and construe a page of Virgil, and Helen obeyed, my organ of veneration expanding at every sounding line. She had scarcely finished ere the bell announced bedtime. No delay could be admitted. Miss Temple embraced us both, saying as she drew us to her heart, "God bless you, my children." Helen she held a little longer than me. She let her go more reluctantly. It was Helen her eye followed to the door. It was for her she a second time breathed a sad sigh. For her she wiped a tear from her cheek. On reaching the bedroom, we heard the voice of Miss Scatcherd. She was examining drawers. She had just pulled out Helen Burns, and when we entered, Helen was greeted with a sharp reprimand, and told that tomorrow she should have half a dozen of untidily folded articles pinned to her shoulder. "My things were indeed in shameful disorder," murmured Helen to me, in a low voice. "I intended to have arranged them, but I forgot." Next morning, Miss Scatcherd wrote in conspicuous characters, on a piece of pasteboard, the word slattern, and bound it like a phylactery, round Helen's large, mild, intelligent, and benign looking forehead. She wore it till evening, patient, unresentful, regarding it as a deserved punishment. The moment Miss Scatcherd withdrew after afternoon school, I ran to Helen, tore it off, and thrust it into the fire. The fury of which she was incapable had been burning in my soul all day, and tears, hot and large, had continually been scalding my cheek, for the spectacle of her sad resignation gave me an intolerable pain at the heart. About a week subsequently to the incidents above narrated, Miss Temple, who had written to Mr. Lloyd, received his answer. It appeared that what he said went to corroborate my account. Miss Temple, having assembled the whole school, announced that inquiry had been made into the charges alleged against Jane Eyre, and that she was most happy to be able to pronounce her completely cleared from every imputation. The teachers then shook hands with me and kissed me, and a murmur of pleasure ran through the ranks of my companions. Thus relieved of a grievous load, I from that hour set to work afresh, resolved to pioneer my way through every difficulty. I toiled hard, and my success was proportionate to my efforts. My memory, not naturally tenacious, improved with practice. Exercise sharpened my wits. In a few weeks, I was promoted to a higher class. In less than 2 months, I was allowed to commence French and drawing. I learned the first 2 tenses of the verb être, and sketched my first cottage, whose walls, by thee by, outrivaled in slope those of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, on the same day. That night, on going to bed, I forgot to prepare in imagination the Barmecide supper of hot roast potatoes, or white bread and new milk, with which I was wont to amuse my inward cravings. I feasted instead on the spectacle of ideal drawings, which I saw in the dark, all the work of my own hands, freely penciled houses and trees, picturesque rocks and ruins, coop-like groups of cattle, sweet paintings of butterflies, hovering over unblown roses, of birds picking at ripe cherries, of wrens' nests enclosing pearl-like, eggs wreathed about with young ivy sprays. I examined, too, in thought, the possibility of my ever being able to translate, currently a certain little French story which Madame Pierrot had that day shown me. Nor was that problem solved to my satisfaction, ere I fell sweetly asleep. Well has Solomon said, "Better is a dinner of herbs where love is, than a stalled ox and hatred therewith." I would not now have exchanged Lowood, with all its privations, for Gateshead, and its daily luxuries. Chapter 9. But the privations, or rather the hardships, of Lowood lessened. Spring drew on. She was indeed already come. The frosts of winter had ceased. Its snows were melted, its cutting winds ameliorated. My wretched feet, flayed and swollen to lameness by the sharp air of January, began to heal and subside under the gentler breathings of April, the nights and mornings. No longer by their Canadian temperature, froze the very blood in our veins. We could now endure the play hour passed in the garden. Sometimes on a sunny day it began even to be pleasant and genial, and a greenness grew over those brown beds, which, freshening daily, suggested the thought that hope traversed them at night, and left each morning brighter traces of her steps. Flowers peeped out amongst the leaves, snowdrops, crocuses, purple auriculas, and golden-eyed pansies. On Thursday afternoons, half-holidays, we now took walks, and found still sweeter flowers opening by the wayside. Under the hedges I discovered, too, that a great pleasure, an enjoyment which the horizon only bounded, lay all outside the high and spike-guarded walls of our garden. This pleasure consisted in prospect of noble summits girdling a great hill hollow, rich in verdure and shadow, in a bright beck, full of dark stones and sparkling eddies. How different had this scene looked when I viewed it laid out beneath the iron sky of winter, stiffened in frost, shrouded with snow. When mists as chill as death wandered to the impulse of east winds along those purple peaks, and rolled down, e'en Eng, and home till they blended with the frozen fog of the beck. That beck itself was then a torrent, turbid and curbless. It tore asunder the wood, and sent a raving sound through the air, often thickened with wild rain or whirling sleet, and for the forest on its banks, that showed only ranks of skeletons. April advanced to May. A bright, serene May it was. Days of blue sky, placid sunshine, and soft western or southern gales filled up its duration. And now vegetation matured with vigor. Lowood shook loose its tresses. It became all green, all flowery. Its great elm, ash, and oak skeletons were restored to majestic life. Woodland plants sprang up profusely in its recesses. Unnumbered varieties of moss filled its hollows, and it made a strange ground sunshine out of the wealth of its wild primrose plants. I have seen their pale gold gleam in overshadowed spots like scatterings of the sweetest luster. All this I enjoyed often and fully, free, unwatched, and almost alone. For this unwanted liberty and pleasure there was a cause, to which it now becomes my task to advert. Have I not described a pleasant site for a dwelling, when I speak of it as bosomed in hill and wood, and rising from the verge of a stream? Assuredly, pleasant enough, but whether healthy or not is another question. That Forestell, where Lowood lay, was the cradle of fog and fog-bred pestilence, which, quickening with the quickening spring, crept into the orphan asylum, breathed typhus through its crowded schoolroom and dormitory, and, ere May arrived, transformed the seminary into an hospital. Semi-starvation and neglected colds had predisposed most of the pupils to receive infection. 45 out of the 80 girls lay ill at one time. Classes were broken up, rules relaxed. The few who continued well were allowed almost unlimited license, because the medical attendant insisted on the necessity of frequent exercise to keep them in health, and had it been otherwise, no one had leisure to watch or restrain them. Miss Temple's whole attention was absorbed by the patients. She lived in the sick room, never quitting it except to snatch a few hours' rest at night. The teachers were fully occupied with packing up and making other necessary preparations for the departure of those girls who were fortunate enough to have friends and relations, able and willing to remove them from the seat of contagion. Many, already smitten, went home only to die. Some died at the school, and were buried quietly and quickly. The nature of the malady forbidding delay, while disease had thus become an inhabitant of Lowood, and death its frequent visitor. while there was gloom and fear within its walls, while its rooms and passages steamed with hospital smells, the drug and the pastille striving vainly to overcome the effluvia of mortality, that bright may shone unclouded over the bold hills and beautiful woodland out of doors. Its garden, too, glowed with flowers. Hollyhocks had sprung up tall as trees. Lilies had opened. Tulips and roses were in bloom. The borders of the little beds were gay with pink thrift and crimson double daisies. The sweetbriars gave out, morning and evening, their scent of spice and apples, and these fragrant treasures were all useless for most of the inmates of Lowood, except to furnish now, and then a handful of herbs and blossoms to put in a coffin. But I, and the rest who continued well, enjoyed fully the beauties of the scene and season. They let us ramble in the wood, like gypsies. From morning till night, we did what we liked. Went where we liked, we lived better too. Mr. Brocklehurst and his family never came near Lowood now. Household matters were not scrutinized into. The cross housekeeper was gone, driven away by the fear of infection. Her successor, who had been matron at the Loughton dispensary, unused to the ways of her new abode, provided with comparative liberality. Besides, there were fewer to feed. The sick could eat little. Our breakfast basins were better filled. When there was no time to prepare a regular dinner, which often happened, she would give us a large piece of cold pie, or a thick slice of bread and cheese. And this we carried away with us to the wood, where we each chose the spot we liked best, and dined sumptuously. My favorite seat was a smooth and broad stone, rising white and dry from the very middle of the beck, and only to be got at by wading through the water, a feat I accomplished barefoot. The stone was just broad enough to accommodate comfortably another girl and me. At that time my chosen comrade, one Mary Ann Wilson, a shrewd, observant personage, whose society I took pleasure in, partly because she was witty and original, and partly because she had a manner which set me at my ease. Some years older than I, she knew more of the world, and could tell me many things I liked to hear. With her my curiosity found gratification. To my faults also she gave ample indulgence, never imposing curb or rein on anything I said. She had a turn for narrative, I for analysis. She liked to inform, I to question. So we got on swimmingly together, deriving much entertainment, if not much improvement, from our mutual intercourse. And where, meantime, was Helen Burns? Why did I not spend these sweet days of liberty with her? Had I forgotten her? Or was I so worthless as to have grown tired of her pure society? Surely the Mary Ann Wilson I have mentioned was inferior to my first acquaintance. She could only tell me amusing stories, and reciprocate any racy and pungent gossip I chose to indulge in, while, if I have spoken truth of Helen, she was qualified to give those who enjoyed the privilege of her converse a taste of far higher things. True, reader, and I knew and felt this, and though I am a defective being, with many faults and few redeeming points, yet I never tired of Helen Burns, nor ever ceased to cherish for her a sentiment of attachment, as strong, tender, and respectful as any that ever animated my heart. How could it be otherwise, when Helen, at all times, and under all circumstances, evinced for me a quiet and faithful friendship, which ill-humor never soured, nor irritation never troubled. But Helen was ill at present. For some weeks she had been removed from my sight, to I knew not what room upstairs. She was not, I was told, in the hospital portion of the house with the fever patients. For her complaint was consumption, not typhus, and by consumption I, in my ignorance, understood something mild, which time and care would be sure to alleviate. I was confirmed in this idea by the fact of her once or twice coming downstairs, on very warm sunny afternoons, and being taken by Miss Temple into the garden. But, on these occasions, I was not allowed to go and speak to her. I only saw her from the schoolroom window, and then not distinctly, for she was much wrapped up, and sat at a distance under the veranda. One evening, in the beginning of June, I had stayed out very late with Mary Ann in the wood. We had, as usual, separated ourselves from the others, and had wandered so far that we lost our way, and had to ask it at a lonely cottage, where a man and woman lived, who looked after a herd of half-wild swine, that fed on the mast in the wood. When we got back, it was after moonrise. A pony, which we knew to be the surgeon's, was standing at the garden door. Mary Ann remarked that she supposed someone must be very ill, as Mr. Bates had been sent for at that time of the evening. She went into the house. I stayed behind a few minutes to plant in my garden a handful of roots I had dug up in the forest, and which I feared would wither if I left them till the morning. This done, I lingered yet a little longer. The flowers smelt so sweet as the dew fell. It was such a pleasant evening, so serene, so warm. The still glowing west promised so fairly another fine day on the morrow. The moon rose with such majesty in the grave east. I was noting these things and enjoying them as a child might, when it entered my mind, as it had never done before. How sad to be lying now on a sick bed, and to be in danger of dying. This world is pleasant. It would be dreary to be called from it, and to have to go who knows where. And then my mind made its first earnest effort to comprehend what had been infused into it concerning heaven and hell. And for the first time it recoiled, baffled, and for the first time glancing behind, on each side. And before it saw all round an unfathomed gulf. It felt the one point where it stood, the present. All the rest was formless cloud and vacant depth, and it shuddered at the thought of tottering and plunging amid that chaos. While pondering this new idea, I heard the front door open. Mr. Bates came out, and with him was a nurse. After she had seen him mount his horse and depart, she was about to close the door, but I ran up to her. "How is Helen Burns?" "Very poorly," was the answer. "Is it her Mr. Bates has been to see?" "Yes." "And what does he say about her?" "He says shall not be here long." This phrase, uttered in my hearing yesterday, would have only conveyed the notion that she was about to be removed to Northumberland, to her own home. I should not have suspected that it meant she was dying. But I knew instantly now, it opened clear on my comprehension, that Helen Burns was numbering her last days in this world, and that she was going to be taken to the region of spirits, if such region there were. I experienced a shock of horror, then a strong thrill of grief, then a desire, a necessity to see her, and I asked in what room she lay. "She is in Miss Temple's room," said the nurse. "May I go up and speak to her?" "Oh, no, child. It is not likely, and now it is time for you to come in. You'll catch the fever if you stop out when the dew is falling." The nurse closed the front door. I went in by the side entrance which led to the schoolroom. I was just in time. It was 9 o'clock, and Miss Miller was calling the pupils to go to bed. It might be 2 hours later, probably near 11, when I, not having been able to fall asleep, and deeming, from the perfect silence of the dormitory, that my companions were all wrapped in profound repose, rose softly, put on my frock over my night-dress, and, without shoes, crept from the apartment, and set off in quest of Miss Temple's room. It was quite at the other end of the house, but I knew my way, and the light of the unclouded summer moon, entering here and there at passage windows, enabled me to find it without difficulty. An odor of camphor and burnt vinegar warned me when I came near the fever room, and I passed its door quickly, fearful lest the nurse who sat up all night should hear me. I dreaded being discovered and sent back, for I must see Helen. I must embrace her before she died. I must give her one last kiss, exchange with her one last word. Having descended a staircase, traversed a portion of the house below, and succeeded in opening and shutting, without noise, 2 doors, I reached another flight of steps. These I mounted, and then just opposite to me was Miss Temple's room. A light shone through the keyhole and from under the door. A profound stillness pervaded the vicinity. Coming near, I found the door slightly ajar, probably to admit some fresh air into the close abode of sickness. Indisposed to hesitate, and full of impatient impulses, soul and senses quivering with keen throes, I put it back and looked in. My eyes sought Helen, and feared to find death, close by Miss Temple's bed and half covered with its white curtains. There stood a little crib. I saw the outline of a form under the clothes, but the face was hid by the hangings. The nurse I had spoken to in the garden sat in an easy-chair asleep. An unsnuffed candle burnt dimly on the table. Miss Temple was not to be seen. I knew afterwards that she had been called to a delirious patient in the fever room. I advanced, then paused by the crib-side. My hand was on the curtain. but I preferred speaking before I withdrew it. I still recoiled at the dread of seeing a corpse. "Helen," I whispered softly, "are you awake?" She stirred herself, put back the curtain, and I saw her face, pale-wasted, but quite composed. She looked so little changed that my fear was instantly dissipated. "Can it be you, Jane?" she asked, in her own gentle voice. "Oh," I thought, "she is not going to die. They are mistaken. She could not speak and look so calmly if she were." I got onto her crib and kissed her. Her forehead was cold, and her cheek both cold and thin, and so were her hand and wrist. But she smiled as of old. "Why are you come here, Jane?" "It is past 11 o'clock. I heard it strike some minutes since." "I came to see you, Helen. I heard you were very ill, and I could not sleep till I had spoken to you." "You came to bid me goodbye, then? You are just in time, probably." "Are you going somewhere, Helen? Are you going home?" "Yes, to my long home, my last home." "No, no, Helen." I stopped, distressed. While I tried to devour my tears, a fit of coughing seized Helen. It did not, however, wake the nurse. When it was over, she lay some minutes exhausted. Then she whispered, "Jane, your little feet are bare. Lie down and cover yourself with my quilt." I did so. She put her arm over me, and I nestled close to her. After a long silence, she resumed, still whispering, "I am very happy, Jane. And when you hear that I am dead, you must be sure and not grieve. There is nothing to grieve about. We all must die one day, and the illness which is removing me is not painful. It is gentle and gradual. My mind is at rest. I leave no one to regret me much. I have only a father, and he is lately married and will not miss me. By dying young, I shall escape great sufferings. I had not qualities or talents to make my way very well in the world. I should have been continually at fault." "But where are you going to, Helen? Can you see? Do you know?" "I believe I have faith. I am going to God. Where is God? What is God? My Maker and yours, who will never destroy what he created. I rely implicitly on his power, and confide wholly in his goodness. I count the hours till that eventful one arrives which shall restore me to him, reveal him to me. You are sure, then, Helen, that there is such a place as heaven, and that our souls can get to it when we die?" "I am sure there is a future state. I believe God is good. I can resign my immortal part to him without any misgiving. God is my Father. God is my friend. I love him. I believe he loves me. And shall I see you again, Helen, when I die? You will come to the same region of happiness, be received by the same mighty, universal parent, no doubt. Dear Jane," again I questioned, but this time only in thought, "where is that region? Does it exist?" And I clasped my arms closer round Helen. She seemed dearer to me than ever. I felt as if I could not let her go. I lay with my face hidden on her neck. "Presently," she said, in the sweetest tone, "how comfortable I am. That last fit of coughing has tired me a little. I feel as if I could sleep, but don't leave me. Jane, I like to have you near me. You'll stay with you, dear Helen. No one shall take me away. Are you warm, darling?" "Yes, good night, Jane. Good night, Helen." She kissed me, and I her, and we both soon slumbered. When I awoke it was day. An unusual movement roused me. I looked up. I was in somebody's arms. The nurse held me. She was carrying me through the passage back to the dormitory. I was not reprimanded for leaving my bed. People had something else to think about. No explanation was afforded then to my many questions. But a day or two afterwards, I learned that Miss Temple, on returning to her own room at dawn, had found me laid in the little crib, my face against Helen Burns's shoulder, my arms round her neck. I was asleep, and Helen was dead. Her grave is in Brocklebridge churchyard. For 15 years after her death, it was only covered by a grassy mound. But now a grey marble tablet marks the spot, inscribed with her name and the word Resurgam. Chapter 10. Hitherto I have recorded in detail the events of my insignificant existence. To the first 10 years of my life I have given almost as many chapters. But this is not to be a regular autobiography. I am only bound to invoke memory, where I know her responses will possess some degree of interest. Therefore I now pass a space of 8 years, almost in silence, A few lines only are necessary to keep up the links of connection. When the typhus fever had fulfilled its mission of devastation at Lowood, it gradually disappeared from thence, but not till its virulence, and the number of its victims had drawn public attention on the school. Inquiry was made into the origin of the scourge, and by degrees various facts came out which excited public indignation in a high degree. The unhealthy nature of the site, the quantity and quality of the children's food, the brackish, fetid water used in its preparation, the pupils' wretched clothing and accommodations. All these things were discovered, and the discovery produced a result mortifying to Mr. Brocklehurst, but beneficial to the institution. Several wealthy and benevolent individuals in the county subscribed largely for the erection of a more convenient building in a better situation. New regulations were made, improvements in diet and clothing introduced. The funds of the school were entrusted to the management of a committee, Mr. Brocklehurst, who, from his wealth and family connections, could not be overlooked, still retained the post of treasurer. But he was aided in the discharge of his duties by gentlemen of rather more enlarged and sympathizing minds. His office of inspector, too, was shared by those who knew how to combine reason with strictness, comfort with economy, compassion with uprightness. The school, thus improved, became in time a truly useful and noble institution. I remained an inmate of its walls, after its regeneration, for 8 years, 6 as pupil, and 2 as teacher. And in both capacities, I bear my testimony to its value and importance. During these 8 years, my life was uniform, but not unhappy, because it was not inactive. I had the means of an excellent education placed within my reach, a fondness for some of my studies, and a desire to excel in all, together with a great delight in pleasing my teachers, especially such as I loved, urged me on. I availed myself fully of the advantages offered me. In time I rose to be the first girl of the first class. Then I was invested with the office of teacher, which I discharged with zeal for 2 years. But at the end of that time, I altered. Miss Temple, through all changes, had thus far continued superintendent of the seminary. To her instruction I owed the best part of my acquirements. Her friendship and society had been my continual solace. She had stood me in the stead of mother, governess, and, latterly, companion. At this period, she married, removed with her husband, a clergyman, an excellent man, almost worthy of such a wife, to a distant county, and consequently was lost to me. From the day she left, I was no longer the same. With her was gone every settled feeling, every association that had made Lowood, in some degree, a home to me. I had imbibed from her something of her nature, and much of her habits, more harmonious thoughts. What seemed better regulated feelings had become the inmates of my mind. I had given an allegiance to duty and order. I was quiet. I believed I was content, to the eyes of others. Usually even to my own, I appeared a disciplined and subdued character. But destiny, in the shape of the Reverend Mr. Nasmyth, came between me and Miss Temple. I saw her in her traveling dress step into a post-chaise, shortly after the marriage ceremony. I watched the chaise mount the hill and disappear beyond its brow, and then retired to my own room, and there spent in solitude the greatest part of the half-holiday granted in honor of the occasion. I walked about the chamber most of the time. I imagined myself only to be regretting my loss, and thinking how to repair it. But when my reflections were concluded, and I looked up and found that the afternoon was gone, and evening far advanced, another discovery dawned on me, namely, that in the interval I had undergone a transforming process, that my mind had put off all it had borrowed of Miss Temple, or rather that she had taken with her the serene atmosphere I had been breathing in her vicinity, and that now I was left in my natural element, and beginning to feel the stirring of old emotions. It did not seem as if a prop were withdrawn, but rather as if a motive were gone. It was not the power to be tranquil which had failed me. But the reason for tranquillity was no more. My world had for some years been in Lowood. My experience had been of its rules and systems. Now I remembered that the real world was wide, and that a varied field of hopes and fears, of sensations and excitements, awaited those who had courage to go forth into its expanse, to seek real knowledge of life amidst its perils. I went to my window, opened it, and looked out. There were the 2 wings of the building. There was the garden. There were the skirts of Lowood. There was the hilly horizon. My eye passed all other objects to rest on those most remote. The blue peaks, it was those I longed to surmount. All within their boundary of rock and heath seemed prison ground, exile limits. I traced the white road winding round the base of one mountain, and vanishing in a gorge between two, how I longed to follow it farther. I recalled the time when I had traveled that very road in a coach. I remembered descending that hill at twilight. An age seemed to have elapsed since the day which brought me first to Lowood, and I had never quitted it since. My vacations had all been spent at school. Mrs. Reed had never sent for me to Gateshead. Neither she nor any of her family had ever been to visit me. I had had no communication by letter or message with the outer world. School rules, school duties, school habits and notions, and voices, and faces, and phrases, and costumes, and preferences, and antipathies. Such was what I knew of existence, and now I felt that it was not enough. I tired of the routine of 8 years and one afternoon. I desired liberty. For liberty I gasped. For liberty I uttered a prayer. It seemed scattered on the wind, then faintly blowing. I abandoned it and framed a humbler supplication. For change. Stimulus that petition, too, seemed swept off into vague space. Then, I cried, half desperate, grant me at least a new servitude. Here a bell ringing the hour of supper called me downstairs. I was not free to resume the interrupted chain of my reflections till bedtime. Even then, a teacher who occupied the same room with me kept me from the subject to which I longed to recur by a prolonged effusion of small talk. How I wished sleep would silence her. It seemed as if, could I but go back to the idea which had last entered my mind as I stood at the window, some inventive suggestion would rise for my relief. Miss Gryce snored at last. She was a heavy Welshwoman. Until now her habitual nasal strains had never been regarded by me in any other light than as a nuisance. Tonight, I hailed the first deep notes with satisfaction. I was debarrassed of interruption. My half-effaced thought instantly revived. A new servitude. There is something in that, I soliloquized. Mentally be it understood, I did not talk aloud. I know there is, because it does not sound too sweet. It is not like such words as liberty, excitement, enjoyment, delightful sounds, truly, but no more than sounds for me, and so hollow and fleeting that it is mere waste of time to listen to them. But servitude, that must be matter of fact. Anyone may serve. I have served here 8 years. Now all I want is to serve elsewhere. Can I not get so much of my own will? Is not the thing feasible? Yes, the end is not so difficult. If I had only a brain active enough to ferret out the means of attaining it. I sat up in bed by way of arousing this said brain. It was a chilly night. I covered my shoulders with a shawl, and then I proceeded to think again with all my might. What do I want? A new place, in a new house, amongst new faces, under new circumstances. I want this because it is of no use wanting anything better. How do people do to get a new place? They apply to friends, I suppose. I have no friends. There are many others who have no friends, who must look about for themselves, and be their own helpers. And what is their resource? I could not tell. Nothing answered me. I then ordered my brain to find a response, and quickly. It worked, and worked faster. I felt the pulses throb in my head and temples. But for nearly an hour it worked in chaos, and no result came of its efforts. Feverish with vain labor, I got up and took a turn in the room, undrew the curtain, noted a star or two, shivered with cold, and again crept to bed. A kind fairy, in my absence, had surely dropped the required suggestion on my pillow, for as I lay down, it came quietly and naturally to my mind. Those who want situations advertise. You must advertise in the Shire Herald. How? I know nothing about advertising. Replies rose smooth and prompt now. You must enclose the advertisement, and the money to pay for it under a cover directed to the editor of the Herald. You must put it, the first opportunity you have, into the post at Loughton. Answers must be addressed to J. At the post office there, you can go and inquire in about a week after you send your letter, if any are come, and act accordingly. This scheme I went over twice. Thrice, it was then digested in my mind. I had it in a clear practical form. I felt satisfied, and fell asleep. With earliest day, I was up. I had my advertisement written and closed, and directed before the bell rang to rouse the school. It ran thus: "A young lady, accustomed to tuition, had I not been a teacher 2 years, is desirous of meeting with a situation in a private family where the children are under 14. I thought that, as I was barely 18, it would not do to undertake the guidance of pupils nearer my own age. She is qualified to teach the usual branches of a good English education, together with French, drawing, and music. In those days, reader, this now narrow catalogue of accomplishments would have been held tolerably comprehensive. Address, G. Post Office, Lowton, Shire." This document remained locked in my drawer all day. After tea, I asked leave of the new superintendent to go to Lowton, in order to perform some small commissions for myself, and 1 or 2 of my fellow teachers. Permission was readily granted. I went. It was a walk of 2 miles, and the evening was wet, but the days were still long. I visited a shop or 2, slipped the letter into the post office, and came back through heavy rain, with streaming garments, but with a relieved heart. The succeeding week seemed long. It came to an end at last, however, like all sublunary things, and once more, towards the close of a pleasant autumn day, I found myself afoot on the road to Lowton. A picturesque track it was, by the way, lying along the side of the beck, and through the sweetest curves of the dale. But that day I thought more of the letters, that might or might not be awaiting me at the little burgh whither I was bound, than of the charms of lay and water. My ostensible errand on this occasion was to get measured for a pair of shoes. So I discharged that business first, and when it was done, I stepped across the clean and quiet little street from the shoemaker's to the post office. It was kept by an old dame, who wore horn spectacles on her nose, and black mittens on her hands. "Are there any letters for G?" I asked. She peered at me over her spectacles, and then she opened a drawer and fumbled among its contents for a long time. So long that my hopes began to falter. At last, having held a document before her glasses for nearly 5 minutes, she presented it across the counter, accompanying the act by another inquisitive and mistrustful glance. "It was for G.A. Is there only one?" I demanded. "There are no more," said she, and I put it in my pocket and turned my face homeward. I could not open it then. Rules obliged me to be back by 8, and it was already 7:30. Various duties awaited me on my arrival. I had to sit with the girls during their hour of study. Then it was my turn to read prayers, to see them to bed. Afterwards, I supped with the other teachers. Even when we finally retired for the night, the inevitable Miss Gryce was still my companion. We had only a short end of candle in our candlestick, and I dreaded lest she should talk till it was all burnt out. Fortunately, however, the heavy supper she had eaten produced a soporific effect. She was already snoring before I had finished undressing. There still remained an inch of candle. I now took out my letter. The seal was an initial F. I broke it. The contents were brief. If G, who advertised in the Shire Herald of last Thursday, possesses the acquirements mentioned, and if she is in a position to give satisfactory references as to character and competency, a situation can be offered her where there is but one pupil, a little girl, under 10 years of age, and where the salary is £30 per annum. G is requested to send references, name, address, and all particulars to the direction: Mrs. Fairfax, Thornfield, near Millcote, Shire. I examined the document long. The writing was old-fashioned and rather uncertain, like that of an elderly lady. This circumstance was satisfactory. A private fear had haunted me, that in thus acting for myself, and by my own guidance, I ran the risk of getting into some scrape, and, above all things, I wished the result of my endeavors to be respectable, proper, and regal. I now felt that an elderly lady was no bad ingredient in the business I had on hand. Mrs. Fairfax. I saw her in a black gown and widow's cap, frigid, perhaps, but not uncivil, a model of elderly English respectability. Thornfield, that, doubtless, was the name of her house. A neat, orderly spot, I was sure, though I failed in my efforts to conceive a correct plan of the premises. Millcote, Shire. I brushed up my recollections of the map of England. Yes, I saw it, both the Shire and the town. shire was 70 miles nearer London than the remote county where I now resided. That was a recommendation to me. I longed to go where there was life and movement. Millcote was a large manufacturing town on the banks of the A busy place enough, doubtless, so much the better. It would be a complete change, at least. Not that my fancy was much captivated by the idea of long chimneys and clouds of smoke. But, I argued, Thornfield will probably be a good way from the town. Here the socket of the candle dropped, and the wick went out. Next day new steps were to be taken. My plans could no longer be confined to my own breast. I must impart them in order to achieve their success. Having sought and obtained an audience of the superintendent during the noontide recreation, I told her I had a prospect of getting a new situation where the salary would be double what I now received. For at Lowood, I only got £15 per annum, and requested she would break the matter for me to Mr. Brocklehurst, or some of the committee, and ascertain whether they would permit me to mention them as references. She obligingly consented to act as mediatrix in the matter. The next day, she laid the affair before Mr. Brocklehurst, who said that Mrs. Reed must be written to, as she was my natural guardian. A note was accordingly addressed to that lady, who returned for answer that I might do as I pleased. She had long relinquished all interference in my affairs. This note went the round of the committee, and at last, after what appeared to me most tedious delay, formal leave was given me to better my condition, if I could, and an assurance added that as I had always conducted myself well, both as teacher and pupil, at Lowood, a testimonial of character and capacity, signed by the inspectors of that institution, should forthwith be furnished me. This testimonial I accordingly received in about a month, forwarded a copy of it to Mrs. Fairfax, and got that lattice reply, stating that she was satisfied, and fixing that day fortnight as the period for my assuming the post of governess in her house. I now busied myself in preparations. The fortnight passed rapidly. I had not a very large wardrobe, though it was adequate to my wants, and the last day sufficed to pack my trunk, the same I had brought with me 8 years ago from Gateshead. The box was corded, the card nailed on. In half an hour the carrier was to call for it to take it to Loughton, whither I myself was to repair at an early hour the next morning to meet the coach. I had brushed my black stuff travelling dress, prepared my bonnet, gloves, and muff, sought in all my drawers to see that no article was left behind. And now, having nothing more to do, I sat down and tried to rest. I could not. Though I had been on foot all day, I could not now repose an instant. I was too much excited. A phase of my life was closing tonight, a new one opening tomorrow. Impossible to slumber in the interval. I must watch feverishly while the change was being accomplished. "Miss," said a servant who met me in the lobby, where I was wandering like a troubled spirit, "a person below wishes to see you." The carrier, no doubt, I thought, and ran downstairs without inquiry. I was passing the back parlor, or teacher's sitting room, the door of which was half open, to go to the kitchen, when someone ran out. "It's her, I am sure. I could have told her, anywhere," cried the individual who stopped my progress and took my hand. I looked. I saw a woman attired like a well-dressed servant, matronly, yet still young, very good-looking, with black hair and eyes and lively complexion. "Well, who is it?" she asked, in a voice and with a smile I half recognized. "You've not quite forgotten me, I think, Miss Jane." In another second I was embracing and kissing her rapturously. "Bessie, Bessie, Bessie!" That was all I said, whereat she half laughed, half cried, and we both went into the parlor. By the fire stood a little fellow of 3 years old, in plaid frock and trousers. "That is my little boy," said Bessie directly. "Then you were married, Bessie?" "Yes, nearly 5 years since to Robert Levin, the coachman, and I have a little girl besides Bobby there that I have christened Jane." "And you don't live at Gateshead?" "I live at the lodge the old porter has left." "Well, and how do they all get on? Tell me everything about them, Bessie. But sit down first. And, Bobby, come and sit on my knee, will you?" But Bobby preferred sidling over to his mother. "You're not grown so very tall, Miss Jane, nor so very stout," continued Mrs. Levin. "I dare say they've not kept you too well at school. Miss Reed is the head and shoulders taller than you are, and Miss Georgiana would make 2 of you in breadth. Georgiana is handsome, I suppose, Bessie?" "Very. She went up to London last winter with her mamma, and there everybody admired her, and a young lord fell in love with her. but his relations were against the match. And, what do you think? He and Miss Georgiana made it up to run away, but they were found out and stopped. It was Miss Reed that found them out. I believe she was envious, and now she and her sister lead a cat and dog life together. They are always quarreling. Well, and what of John Reed? Oh, he is not doing so well as his mamma could wish. He went to college, and he got plucked, I think they call it, and then his uncles wanted him to be a barrister and study the law. But he is such a dissipated young man. They will never make much of him, I think. What does he look like? He is very tall. Some people call him a fine-looking young man, but he has such thick lips. And Mrs. Reed. Mrs. looks stout and well enough in the face, but I think she's not quite easy in her mind. Mr. John's conduct does not please her. He spends a deal of money. Did she send you here, Bessie? No, indeed, but I have long wanted to see you, and when I heard that there had been a letter from you, and that you were going to another part of the country, I thought I'd just set off and get a look at you before you were quite out of my reach. I am afraid you are disappointed in me, Bessie. I said this laughing. I perceived that Bessie's glance, though it expressed regard, did in no shape denote admiration. No, Miss Jane, not exactly. You are genteel enough. You look like a lady, and it is as much as ever I expected of you. You were no beauty as a child. I smiled at Bessie's frank answer. I felt that it was correct, but I confess I was not quite indifferent to its import. At 18 most people wish to please, and the conviction that they have not an exterior likely to second, that desire brings anything but gratification. I dare say you are clever, though, continued Bessie, by way of solace. What can you do? Can you play on the piano? A little. There was one in the room. Bessie went and opened it, and then asked me to sit down and give her a tune. I played a waltz or two, and she was charmed. The Miss Reeds could not play as well, said she exultingly. I always said you would surpass them in learning. And can you draw? That is one of my paintings over the chimney-piece. It was a landscape in watercolors, of which I had made a present to the superintendent, in acknowledgment of her obliging mediation with the committee on my behalf, and which she had framed and glazed. Well, that is beautiful, Miss Jane. It is as fine a picture as any Miss Reed's drawing master could paint, let alone the young ladies themselves, who could not come near it. And have you learnt French? Yes, Bessie, I can both read it and speak it. And you can work on muslin and canvas. I can. Oh, you are quite a lady, Miss Jane. I knew you would be. You will get on whether your relations notice you or not. There was something I wanted to ask you. Have you ever heard anything from your father's kinsfolk, the Eyres? Never in my life. Well, you know Mrs. always said they were poor, and quite despicable. And they may be poor, but I believe they are as much gentry as the Reeds are. For one day, nearly 7 years ago, a Mr. Eyre came to Gateshead and wanted to see you. Mrs. said you were at school 50 miles off. He seemed so much disappointed, for he could not stay. He was going on a voyage to a foreign country, and the ship was to sail from London in a day or two. He looked quite a gentleman, and I believe he was your father's brother. What foreign country was he going to, Bessie? An island thousands of miles off, where they make wine. The butler did tell me Madeira, I suggested. Yes, that is it. That is the very word. So he went. Yes, he did not stay many minutes in the house. Mrs. was very high with him. She called him afterwards a sneaking tradesman. My Robert believes he was a wine merchant. Very likely, I returned, or perhaps clerk or agent to a wine merchant. Bessie and I conversed about old times an hour longer, and then she was obliged to leave me. I saw her again for a few minutes the next morning at Lowton. While I was waiting for the coach, we parted finally at the door of the Brocklehurst Arms there. Each went her separate way. She set off for the brow of Lowood, fell to meet the conveyance, which was to take her back to Gateshead. I mounted the vehicle, which was to bear me to new duties, and a new life in the unknown environs of Millcote. Chapter 11, a new chapter in a novel, is something like a new scene in a play. And when I draw up the curtain this time, reader, you must fancy you see a room in the George Inn at Millcote, with such large figured papering on the walls as inn-rooms have, such a carpet, such furniture, such ornaments on the mantelpiece, such prints, including a portrait of George III and another of the Prince of Wales, and a representation of the death of Wolfe. All this is visible to you by the light of an oil lamp hanging from the ceiling, and by that of an excellent fire, near which I sit in my cloak and bonnet. My muff and umbrella lie on the table, and I am warming away the numbness and chill contracted by 16 hours' exposure to the rawness of an October day. I left Loughton at 4 o'clock a.m., and the Millcote town clock is now just striking 8. Reader, though I look comfortably accommodated, I am not very tranquil in my mind. I thought when the coach stopped here there would be someone to meet me. I looked anxiously round as I descended the wooden steps, the boots, placed for my convenience, expecting to hear my name pronounced, and to see some description of carriage waiting to convey me to Thornfield. Nothing of the sort was visible, and when I asked a waiter if anyone had been to inquire after a Miss Eyre, I was answered in the negative, so I had no resource but to request to be shown into a private room. And here I am waiting, while all sorts of doubts and fears are troubling my thoughts. It is a very strange sensation to an experienced youth to feel itself quite alone in the world, cut adrift from every connection, uncertain whether the port to which it is bound can be reached, and prevented by many impediments from returning to that it has quitted. The charm of adventure sweetens that sensation. The glow of pride warms it, but then the throb of fear disturbs it. And fear with me became predominant when half an hour elapsed, and still I was alone. I bethought myself to ring the bell. "Is there a place in this neighborhood called Thornfield?" I asked of the waiter who answered the summons. "Thornfield? I don't know, ma'am. I'll inquire at the bar." He vanished, but reappeared instantly. "Is your name Eyre, miss?" "Yes. Person here waiting for you." I jumped up, took my muff and umbrella, and hastened into the inn passage. A man was standing by the open door, and in the lamplit street I dimly saw a one-horse conveyance. "This will be your luggage, I suppose," said the man rather abruptly when he saw me, pointing to my trunk in the passage. Yes, he hoisted it on to the vehicle, which was a sort of car, and then I got in before he shut me up. I asked him how far it was to Thornfield. "A matter of 6 miles." "How long shall we be before we get there?" "Happen an hour and a half." He fastened the car door, climbed to his own seat outside, and we set off. Our progress was leisurely, and gave me ample time to reflect. I was content to be at length so near the end of my journey, and as I leaned back in the comfortable, though not elegant conveyance, I meditated much at my ease. I suppose, thought I, judging from the plainness of the servant and carriage, Mrs. Fairfax is not a very dashing person. So much the better. I never lived amongst fine people, but once, and I was very miserable with them. I wonder if she lives alone except this little girl. If so, and if she is in any degree amiable, I shall surely be able to get on with her. I will do my best. It is a pity that doing one's best does not always answer. At Lowood, indeed, I took that resolution, kept it, and succeeded in pleasing, but with Mrs. Reed. I remember my best was always spurned with scorn. I pray God Mrs. Fairfax may not turn out a second Mrs. Reed, but if she does, I am not bound to stay with her. Let the worst come to the worst. I can advertise again. How far are we on our road now, I wonder? I let down the window and looked out. Millcote was behind us. Judging by the number of its lights, it seemed a place of considerable magnitude, much larger than Loughton. We were now, as far as I could see, on a sort of common, but there were houses scattered all over the district. I felt we were in a different region to Lowood, more populous, less picturesque, more stirring, less romantic. The roads were heavy, the night misty. My conductor let his horse walk all the way, and the hour and a half extended, I verily believe, to 2 hours. At last he turned in his seat and said, "You're known so far fro Thornfield now." Again I looked out. We were passing a church. I saw its low broad tower against the sky, and its bell was tolling a quarter. I saw a narrow galaxy of lights, too, on a hillside, marking a village or hamlet. About 10 minutes after, the driver got down and opened a pair of gates we passed through, and they clashed to behind us. We now slowly ascended a drive and came upon the long front of a house. Candlelight gleamed from one curtain bow window. All the rest were dark. The car stopped at the front door. It was opened by a maidservant. I alighted and went in. "Will you walk this way, ma'am?" said the girl, and I followed her across a square hall with high doors all round. She ushered me into a room whose double illumination of fire and candle at first dazzled me, contrasting as it did with the darkness, to which my eyes had been for 2 hours inured. When I could see, however, a cozy and agreeable picture presented itself to my view. A snug small room, a round table by a cheerful fire, an armchair high-backed and old-fashioned, wherein sat the neatest imaginable little elderly lady in widow's cap, black silk gown, and snowy muslin apron, exactly like what I had fancied Mrs. Fairfax, only less stately and milder looking. She was occupied in knitting. A large cat sat demurely at her feet. Nothing, in short, was wanting to complete the beau ideal of domestic comfort. A more reassuring introduction for a new governess could scarcely be conceived. There was no grandeur to overwhelm, no stateliness to embarrass. And then, as I entered, the old lady got up and promptly and kindly came forward to meet me. "How do you do?" "My dear, I am afraid you have had a tedious ride. John drives so slowly. You must be cold. Come to the fire. Mrs. Fairfax, I suppose," said I. "Yes, you are right. Do sit down." She conducted me to her own chair, and then began to remove my shawl and untie my bonnet strings. I begged she would not give herself so much trouble. "Oh, it is no trouble. I dare say your own hands are almost numbed with cold. Leah, make a little hot negus and cut a sandwich or two. Here are the keys of the storeroom." And she produced from her pocket a most housewifely bunch of keys, and delivered them to the servant. "Now, then, draw nearer to the fire," she continued. "You've brought your luggage with you, haven't you, my dear?" "Yes, Mom." "I'll see it carried into your room," she said, and bustled out. She treats me like a visitor, thought I. I little expected such a reception. I anticipated only coldness and stiffness. This is not like what I have heard of the treatment of governesses. But I must not exult too soon. She returned, with her own hands cleared her knitting apparatus and a book or two from the table, to make room for the tray, which Leah now brought, and then herself handed me the refreshments. I felt rather confused at being the object of more attention than I had ever before received, and that, too, shown by my employer and superior. But as she did not herself seem to consider she was doing anything out of her place, I thought it better to take her civilities quietly. "Shall I have the pleasure of seeing Miss Fairfax tonight?" I asked, when I had partaken of what she offered me. "What did you say, my dear?" "I am a little deaf," returned the good lady, approaching her ear to my mouth. I repeated the question more distinctly. "Miss Fairfax? Oh, you mean Miss Varens. Varens is the name of your future pupil." "Indeed. Then she is not your daughter?" "No, I have no family." I should have followed up my first inquiry by asking in what way Miss Varens was connected with her, but I recollected it was not polite to ask too many questions. Besides, I was sure to hear in time. "I am so glad," she continued as she sat down opposite to me, and took the cat on her knee. "I am so glad you are come. It will be quite pleasant living here now, with a companion. To be sure it is pleasant, at any time. For Thornfield is a fine old hall, rather neglected of late years, perhaps. But still, it is a respectable place. Yet you know in winter-time one feels dreary, quite alone in the best quarters. I say alone. Leah is a nice girl to be sure, and John and his wife are very decent people. But then, you see, they are only servants, and one can't converse with them on terms of equality. One must keep them at due distance, for fear of losing one's authority. I'm sure last winter it was a very severe one, if you recollect. And when it did not snow, it rained and blew, not a creature, but the butcher and postman came to the house, from November till February, and I really got quite melancholy with sitting night after night alone. I had Leah in to read to me sometimes, but I don't think the poor girl liked the task much. She felt it confining. In spring and summer one got on better. Sunshine and long days make such a difference. And then, just at the commencement of this autumn, little Adela Varens came and her nurse. A child makes a house alive all at once. And now you are here. I shall be quite gay." My heart really warmed to the worthy lady as I heard her talk, and I drew my chair a little nearer to her, and expressed my sincere wish that she might find my company as agreeable as she anticipated. "But it'll not keep you sitting up late tonight," said she. "It is on the stroke of 12 now. And you have been traveling all day. You must feel tired. If you have got your feet well warmed, I'll show you your bedroom. I've had the room next to mine prepared for you. It is only a small apartment, but I thought you would like it better than one of the large front chambers. To be sure, they have finer furniture, but they are so dreary and solitary. I never sleep in them myself. I thanked her for her considerate choice, and as I really felt fatigued with my long journey, expressed my readiness to retire. She took her candle, and I followed her from the room. First, she went to see if the hall door was fastened, having taken the key from the lock. She led the way upstairs. The steps and banisters were of oak. The staircase window was high and latticed. Both it and the long gallery, into which the bedroom doors opened, looked as if they belonged to a church rather than a house. A very chill and vault-like air pervaded the stairs and gallery, suggesting cheerless ideas of space and solitude, and I was glad, when finally ushered into my chamber, to find it of small dimensions and furnished in ordinary, modern style. When Mrs. Fairfax had bidden me a kind good night, and I had fastened my door, gazed leisurely round, and in some measure effaced the eerie impression made by that wide hall, that dark and spacious staircase, and that long, cold gallery, by the livelier aspect of my little room, I remembered that, after a day of bodily fatigue and mental anxiety, I was now at last in safe haven. The impulse of gratitude swelled my heart, and I knelt down at the bedside, and offered up thanks where thanks were due, not forgetting, ere I rose, to implore aid on my further path, and the power of meriting the kindness which seemed so frankly offered me before it was earned. My couch had no thorns in it that night, my solitary room no fears. At once weary and content, I slept soon and soundly. When I awoke, it was broad day. The chamber looked such a bright little place to me, as the sun shone in between the gay blue chintz window curtains, showing papered walls and a carpeted floor, so unlike the bare planks and stained plaster of Lowood, that my spirits rose at the view. Externals have a great effect on the young. I thought that a fairer era of life was beginning for me, one that was to have its flowers and pleasures as well as its thorns and toils. My faculties, roused by the change of scene, the new field offered to hope, seemed all astir. I cannot precisely define what they expected, but it was something pleasant, not perhaps that day or that month, but at an indefinite future period. I rose. I dressed myself with care, obliged to be plain, for I had no article of attire that was not made with extreme simplicity. I was still by nature solicitous to be neat. It was not my habit to be disregardful of appearance or careless of the impression I made. On the contrary, I ever wished to look as well as I could, and to please as much as my want of beauty would permit. I sometimes regretted that I was not handsomer. I sometimes wished to have rosy cheeks, a straight nose, and small cherry mouth. I desired to be tall, stately, and finely developed in figure. I felt it a misfortune that I was so little, so pale, and had features so irregular and so marked. And why had I these aspirations and these regrets? It would be difficult to say. I could not then distinctly say it to myself. Yet I had a reason, and a logical, natural reason too. However, when I had brushed my hair very smooth, and put on my black frock, which, Quaker-like as it was, at least had the merit of fitting to a nicety, and adjusted my clean white tucker, I thought I should do respectably enough to appear before Mrs. Fairfax, and that my new pupil would not at least recoil from me with antipathy. Having opened my chamber window, and seen that I left all things straight and neat on the toilet table, I ventured forth, traversing the long and matted gallery. I descended the slippery steps of oak. Then I gained the hall. I halted there a minute. I looked at some pictures on the walls. One, I remember, represented a grim man in a cuirass, and one a lady with powdered hair and a pearl necklace, at a bronze lamp pendant from the ceiling, at a great clock, whose case was of oak, curiously carved, and ebon black, with time and rubbing. Everything appeared very stately and imposing to me. But then I was so little accustomed to grandeur. The hall door, which was half of glass, stood open. I stepped over the threshold. It was a fine autumn morning. The early sun shone serenely on embrowned groves and still green fields advancing onto the lawn. I looked up and surveyed the front of the mansion. It was 3 stories high, of proportions not vast, though considerable, a gentleman's manor house. not a nobleman's seat. Battlements round the top gave it a picturesque look. Its grey front stood out well from the background of a rookery, whose cawing tenants were now on the wing. They flew over the lawn and grounds to alight in a great meadow, from which these were separated by a sunk fence, and where an array of mighty old thorn trees, strong, knotty, and broad as oaks, at once explained the etymology of the mansion's designation. Farther off were hills, not so lofty as those round Lowood, nor so craggy, nor so like barriers of separation from the living world, but yet quiet and lonely hills enough, and seeming to embrace Thornfield, with a seclusion I had not expected to find existent, so near the stirring locality of Millcote, a little hamlet whose roofs were blent with trees. Straggled up the side of one of these hills, the church of the district stood near a thornfield. Its old tower top looked over a knoll between the house and gates. I was yet enjoying the calm prospect and pleasant fresh air, yet listening with delight to the cawing of the rooks, yet surveying the wide, hoary front of the hall, and thinking what a great place it was for one lonely little dame like Mrs. Fairfax to inhabit, when that lady appeared at the door. "What, out already?" said she. "I see you are an early riser." I went up to her, and was received with an affable kiss and shake of the hand. "How do you like Thornfield?" she asked. I told her I liked it very much. "Yes," she said, "it is a pretty place, but I fear it will be getting out of order, unless Mr. Rochester should take it into his head to come and reside here permanently, or, at least, visit it rather oftener. Great houses and fine grounds require the presence of the proprietor, Mr. Rochester," I exclaimed. "Who is he?" "The owner of Thornfield," she responded quietly. "Did you not know he was called Rochester?" Of course I did not. I had never heard of him before, but the old lady seemed to regard his existence as a universally understood fact, with which everybody must be acquainted by instinct, I thought. I continued. "Thornfield belonged to you, to me. Bless you, child. What an idea. To me, I am only the housekeeper, the manager. To be sure, I am distantly related to the Rochesters by the mother's side, or at least my husband was. He was a clergyman, incumbent of Hay. That little village yonder on the hill, and that church near the gates, was his. The present Mr. Rochester's mother was a Fairfax, and second cousin to my husband. But I never presume on the connection. In fact, it is nothing to me. I consider myself quite in the light of an ordinary housekeeper. My employer is always civil, and I expect nothing more. And the little girl, my pupil, she is Mr. Rochester's ward. He commissioned me to find a governess for her. He intended to have her brought up in Shire, I believe. Here she comes with her bonne, as she calls her nurse." The enigma then was explained. This affable and kind little widow was no great dame, but a dependent like myself. I did not like her the worse for that. On the contrary, I felt better pleased than ever. The equality between her and me was real, not the mere result of condescension on her part. So much the better. My position was all the freer. As I was meditating on this discovery, a little girl, followed by her attendant, came running up the lawn. I looked at my pupil, who did not at first appear to notice me. She was quite a child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, slightly built, with a pale, small-featured face, and a redundancy of hair falling in curls to her waist. "Good morning, Miss Adela," said Mrs. Fairfax. "Come and speak to the lady who is to teach you, and to make you a clever woman some day." She approached. "C'est elle, ma gouvernante," said she, pointing to me, and addressing her nurse, who answered, "Mazur Salment." "Are they foreigners?" I inquired, amazed at hearing the French language. "The nurse is a foreigner, and Adela was born on the continent, and, I believe, never left it till within 6 months ago. When she first came here, she could speak no English. Now she can make shift to talk it a little. I don't understand her. She mixes it so with French. But you will make out her meaning very well, I dare say. Fortunately, I had had the advantage of being taught French by a French lady, and as I had always made a point of conversing with Madame Pierrot as often as I could, and had besides, during the last 7 years, learnt a portion of French by heart daily, applying myself to take pains with my accent, and imitating as closely as possible the pronunciation of my teacher, I had acquired a certain degree of readiness and correctness in the language, and was not likely to be much at a loss with Mademoiselle Adela. She came and shook hands with me when she heard that I was her governess. and as I led her into breakfast, I addressed some phrases to her in her own tongue. She replied briefly at first, but after we were seated at the table, and she had examined me some 10 minutes with her large hazel eyes, she suddenly commenced chattering fluently. "Ah," cried she, in French, "you speak my language as well as Mr. Rochester does. I can talk to you as I can to him, and so can Sophie. She will be glad. Nobody here understands her. Madame Fairfax is all English. Sophie is my nurse. She came with me over the sea, in a great ship, with a chimney that smoked. How it did smoke. And I was sick. And so was Sophie, and so was Mr. Rochester. Mr. Rochester lay down on a sofa in a pretty room called the salon, and Sophie and I had little beds in another place. I nearly fell out of mine. It was like a shelf. And Mademoiselle, what is your name? Eyre. Jane Eyre. Eyre. Bah, I cannot say it. Well, our ship stopped in the morning, before it was quite daylight, at a great city, a huge city, with very dark houses, and all smoky, not at all like the pretty clean town I came from. And Mr. Rochester carried me in his arms over a plank to the land. And Sophie came after, and we all got into a coach, which took us to a beautiful large house, larger than this, and finer, called an hotel. We stayed there nearly a week. I and Sophie used to walk every day in a great green place full of trees, called the park. And there were many children there, besides me, and a pond with beautiful birds in it, that I fed with crumbs. Can you understand her when she runs on so fast? Asked Mrs. Fairfax. I understood her very well, for I had been accustomed to the fluent tongue of Madame Pierrot. I wish, continued the good lady, you would ask her a question or two about her parents. I wonder if she remembers them. Adele, I inquired, with whom did you live when you were in that pretty clean town you spoke of? I lived long ago with Mamma, but she has gone to the Holy Virgin. Mamma used to teach me to dance and sing and to say verses. A great many gentlemen and ladies came to see Mamma, and I used to dance before them, or to sit on their knees and sing to them. I liked it. Shall I let you hear me sing now? She had finished her breakfast, so I permitted her to give a specimen of her accomplishments. Descending from her chair, she came and placed herself on my knee. Then, folding her little hands demurely before her, shaking back her curls and lifting her eyes to the ceiling, she commenced singing a song from some opera. It was the strain of a forsaken lady, who, after bewailing the perfidy of her lover, calls pride to her aid, desires her attendant to deck her in her brightest jewels and richest robes, and resolves to meet the false one that night at a ball, and prove to him, by the gaiety of her demeanor, how little his desertion has affected her. The subject seems strangely chosen for an infant singer, but I suppose the point of the exhibition lay in hearing the notes of love and jealousy warbled with the lisp of childhood. And in very bad taste that point was. At least I thought so. Adele sang the canzonet tunefully enough, and with the navet of her age, this achieved, she jumped from my knee and said, "Now, mademoiselle, I will repeat you some poetry." Assuming an attitude, she began, "La Ligue des Rats, Fable de La Fontaine." She then declaimed the little piece with an attention to punctuation and emphasis, a flexibility of voice and an appropriateness of gesture, very unusual indeed at her age, and which proved she had been carefully trained. "Was it your mamma who taught you that piece?" I asked. "Yes, and she just used to say it in this way, Quaves vautonc, Louis dit, Andiasius rats, parlez." She made me lift my hand. "So, to remind me to raise my voice at the question, now shall I dance for you?" "No, that will do. But after your mamma went to the Holy Virgin, as you say, with whom did you live then?" "With Madame Fredduic and her husband. She took care of me. But she is nothing related to me. I think she is poor, for she had not so fine a house as mamma. I was not long there. Mr. Rochester asked me if I would like to go and live with him in England, and I said yes, for I knew Mr. Rochester before I knew Madame Frederick, and he was always kind to me and gave me pretty dresses and toys. But you see he has not kept his word, for he has brought me to England, and now he has gone back again himself, and I never see him." After breakfast, Adele and I withdrew to the library, which room, it appears, Mr. Rochester had directed should be used as the schoolroom. Most of the books were locked up behind glass doors, but there was one bookcase left open, containing everything that could be needed in the way of elementary works, and several volumes of light literature, poetry, biography, travels, a few romances, etc. I suppose he had considered that these were all the governess would require for her private perusal, and, indeed, they contented me amply for the present, compared with the scanty pickings I had now and then been able to glean at Lowood. They seemed to offer an abundant harvest of entertainment and information. In this room, too, there was a cabinet piano, quite new and of superior tone, also an easel for painting and a pair of globes. I found my pupil sufficiently docile, though disinclined to apply. She had not been used to regular occupation of any kind. I felt it would be injudicious to confine her too much at first. So, when I had talked to her a great deal, and got her to learn a little, and when the morning had advanced to noon, I allowed her to return to her nurse. I then proposed to occupy myself till dinner time in drawing some little sketches for her use. As I was going upstairs to fetch my portfolio and pencils, Mrs. Fairfax called to me. "Your morning school hours are over now, I suppose," said she. She was in a room the folding doors of which stood open. I went in when she addressed me. It was a large, stately apartment, with purple chairs and curtains, a Turkey carpet, walnut-panelled walls, one vast window rich in stained glass, and a lofty ceiling, nobly moulded. Mrs. Fairfax was dusting some vases of fine purple spar, which stood on a sideboard. "What a beautiful room!" I exclaimed, as I looked round, for I had never before seen any half so imposing. "Yes, this is the dining room. I have just opened the window to let in a little air and sunshine, for everything gets so damp in apartments that are seldom inhabited. The drawing-room yonder feels like a vault." She pointed to a wide arch corresponding to the window, and hung like it with a tyriandied curtain, now looped up, mounting to it by 2 broad steps, and looking through. I thought I caught a glimpse of a fairy place. So bright to my novice eyes appeared the view beyond. Yet it was merely a very pretty drawing-room, and within it a boudoir, both spread with white carpets, on which seemed laid brilliant garlands of flowers, both sealed with snowy mouldings of white grapes and vine leaves, beneath which glowed in rich contrast crimson couches and ottomans, while the ornaments on the pale Parian mantelpiece were of sparkling Bohemian glass, ruby red, and between the windows large mirrors repeated the general blending of snow and fire. "In what order you keep these rooms, Mrs. Fairfax," said I. "No dust, no canvas coverings, except that the air feels chilly. One would think they were inhabited daily." "Why, Miss Eyre?" "Though Mr. Rochester's visits here are rare, they are always sudden and unexpected, and as I observed that it put him out to find everything swathed up, and to have a bustle of arrangement on his arrival, I thought it best to keep the rooms in readiness." "Is Mr. Rochester an exacting, fastidious sort of man?" "Not particularly so, but he has a gentleman's tastes and habits, and he expects to have things managed in conformity to them." "Do you like him? Is he generally liked?" "Oh, yes. The family have always been respected here. Almost all the land in this neighborhood, as far as you can see, has belonged to the Rochesters time out of mind." "Well, but, leaving his land out of the question, do you like him? Is he liked for himself?" "I have no cause to do otherwise than like him, and I believe he is considered a just and liberal landlord by his tenants. But he has never lived much amongst them." "But has he no peculiarities?" "What?" "In short, is his character—" "Oh, his character is unimpeachable, I suppose." "He is rather peculiar, perhaps. He has travelled a great deal, and seen a great deal of the world, I should think." "I dare say he is clever, but I never had much conversation with him." "In what way is he peculiar?" "I don't know. It is not easy to describe nothing striking, but you feel it when he speaks to you. You cannot be always sure whether he is in jest or earnest, whether he is pleased or the contrary. You don't thoroughly understand him, in short. At least I don't. But it is of no consequence. He is a very good master." This was all the account I got from Mrs. Fairfax of her employer and mine. There are people who seem to have no notion of sketching a character, or observing and describing salient points, either in persons or things, The good lady evidently belonged to this class. My queries puzzled, but did not draw her out. Mr. Rochester was Mr. Rochester in her eyes. A gentleman, a landed proprietor. Nothing more. She inquired and searched no further, and evidently wondered at my wish to gain a more definite notion of his identity. When we left the dining room, she proposed to show me over the rest of the house, and I followed her upstairs and downstairs, admiring as I went, for all was well arranged and handsome. The large front chambers I thought especially grand, and some of the third-story rooms, though dark and low, were interesting from their air of antiquity. The furniture, once appropriated to the lower apartments, had from time to time been removed here. As fashions changed, and the imperfect light entering by their narrow casement showed bedsteads of 100 years old, chests in oak or walnut, looking, with their strange carvings of palm branches and cherubs' heads, like types of the Hebrew Ark, rows of venerable chairs, high-backed and narrow, stools still more antiquated, on whose cushioned tops were yet apparent traces of half-effaced embroideries, wrought by fingers that for 2 generations had been coffin dust. All these relics gave to the third story of Thornfield Hall the aspect of a home of the past, a shrine of memory. I liked the hush, the gloom, the quaintness of these retreats in the day, but I by no means coveted a night's repose on one of those wide and heavy beds, shut in. Some of them, with doors of oak, shaded, others, with wrought old English hangings crusted with thick work, portraying effigies of strange flowers, and stranger birds, and strangest human beings, all which would have looked strange, indeed, by the pallid gleam of moonlight. "Do the servants sleep in these rooms?" I asked. "No, they occupy a range of smaller apartments to the back. No one ever sleeps here. One would almost say that, if there were a ghost at Thornfield Hall, this would be its haunt." "So I think you have no ghost, then?" "None that I ever heard of," returned Mrs. Fairfax, smiling. "Nor any traditions of one? No legends or ghost stories?" "I believe not. And yet it is said the Rochesters have been rather a violent than a quiet race in their time. Perhaps, though, that is the reason they rest tranquilly in their graves now." "Yes, after life's fitful fever, they sleep well," I muttered. "Where are you going now, Mrs. Fairfax?" For she was moving away, on to the leads. "Will you come and see the view from thence?" I followed still, up a very narrow staircase to the attics, and thence by a ladder and through a trap-door to the roof of the hall. I was now on a level with the crow colony, and could see into their nests. Leaning over the battlements and looking far down, I surveyed the grounds laid out like a map. The bright and velvet lawn, closely girdling the grey base of the mansion, the field, wide as a park, dotted with its ancient timber, the wood, dun and sere, divided by a path visibly overgrown, greener with moss than the trees were with foliage, the church at the gates, the road, the tranquil hills, all reposing in the autumn day's sun, the horizon bounded by a propitious sky, azure, marbled with pearly white. No feature in the scene was extraordinary, but all was pleasing. When I turned from it and repassed the trapdoor, I could scarcely see my way down the ladder. The attic seemed black as a vault, compared with that arch of blue air to which I had been looking up, and to that sunlit scene of grove, pasture, and green hill, of which the hall was the center, and over which I had been gazing with delight. Mrs. Fairfax stayed behind a moment to fasten the trap-door. I, by dint of groping, found the outlet from the attic, and proceeded to descend the narrow garret staircase. I lingered in the long passage to which this led, separating the front and back rooms of the third story, narrow, low, and dim, with only one little window at the far end, and looking, with its 2 rows of small black doors, all shut, like a corridor in some Bluebeard's castle. While I paced softly on, the last sound I expected to hear, in so still a region, a laugh, struck my ear. It was a curious laugh, distinct, formal, mirthless. The sound ceased, only for an instant. It began again, louder for at first, though distinct. It was very low. It passed off in a clamorous peal that seemed to wake an echo in every lonely chamber, though it originated but in one, and I could have pointed out the door whence the accents issued. "Mrs. Fairfax," I called out, for I now heard her descending the great stairs. "Did you hear that loud laugh? Who is it?" "Some of the servants, very likely," she answered. Perhaps Grace Poole. Did you hear it? I again inquired. Yes, plainly. I often hear her. She sews in one of these rooms. Sometimes Leah is with her. They are frequently noisy together. The laugh was repeated in its low syllabic tone, and terminated in an odd murmur. Grace, exclaimed Mrs. Fairfax. I really did not expect any Grace to answer. For the laugh was as tragic, as preternatural a laugh as any I ever heard, and but that it was high noon, and that no circumstance of ghostliness accompanied the curious cachinnation, but that neither scene nor season favored fear, I should have been superstitiously afraid. However, the event showed me I was a fool for entertaining a sense even of surprise. The door nearest me opened, and a servant came out. A woman of between 30 and 40, a set, square-made figure, red-haired, and with a hard, plain face. Any apparition less romantic or less ghostly could scarcely be conceived. Too much noise. Grace, said Mrs. Fairfax, remember directions. Grace curtsied silently and went in. She is a person we have to sew and assist Leah in her housemaid's work, continued the widow. Not altogether unobjectionable in some points, but she does well enough, by the by. How have you got on with your new pupil this morning? The conversation, thus turned on a dial, continued till we reached the light and cheerful region below. Adele came running to meet us in the hall, exclaiming, Mesdames, vast at service, adding, Jai bien fame, morki. We found dinner ready and waiting for us in Mrs. Fairfax's room.